Story 1. My daughter said I was an irresponsible man because I couldn't show up at her graduation. When I tried to explain I had been in a car crash, she snapped and said, "I don't care about your excuses, you never put me first." My mother-in-law added, "Some dads just don't prioritize their kids." Then my daughter said she doesn't want to see me again. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I smiled, nodded calmly, and left the group chat. The next morning, I canceled everything: her tuition payments, apartment rent, car insurance, and credit cards. 4 hours later, 48 missed calls. I'd never seen that shade of crimson before, not on my phone screen. 48 missed calls, stacked like dominoes ready to fall. I placed my cell on the kitchen counter, screen facing down, and took a slow sip of coffee, wincing as the movement pulled at the stitches across my shoulder and chest. The silence in my apartment felt absolute, pristine even, like the moment after a thunderclap but before the rain. My right arm was still in a sling, and the bandage around my ribcage felt too tight when I breathed deeply, but the doctors had assured me I was lucky. 3 inches to the left, and we wouldn't be having this conversation, the ER doctor had said while stitching my forehead. I could still smell the antiseptic when I closed my eyes. The accident happened 2 days before Maddie's graduation. A truck driver fell asleep at the wheel, drifted across the median on the I-95, and sent my sedan spinning across 3 lanes before it wrapped around a guardrail. They had to cut me out with the jaws of life. I'd been unconscious for 16 hours. When I finally came to, groggy and disoriented in the hospital bed, my first coherent thought was about missing her ceremony. I remember fumbling for my phone, my fingers thick and clumsy from the pain medication, trying to call Maddie. I managed to reach her the morning of her graduation. The connection was terrible in the hospital, but I tried to explain what had happened, that I was sorry, that I'd been in an accident. That's when she'd cut me off, her voice sharp enough to slice through the static. "I don't care about your excuses, you never put me first." Those words had hit harder than the truck. I'd closed my eyes, listening to her breathing on the other end of the line, waiting for her to take it back. But then I heard another voice in the background, Janet, my former mother-in-law. "Some dads just don't prioritize their kids." And then Maddie, my only child, had said the words that would change everything between us. "I don't want to see you again, Dad." I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I couldn't find the energy or the will to explain that I'd been driving through the night to make it to her graduation in the first place, that I'd rescheduled 3 crucial client meetings to be there, that I'd been thinking of nothing but making it in time to see her walk across that stage. Instead, I'd simply said, "I understand," and ended the call. Later that day, still in the hospital bed, I'd received a group text from Janet with photos of the ceremony. Maddie in her cap and gown, smiling beside her mother, Rebecca. Janet had written, "What Maddie achieved today despite the challenges and absent figures in her life. Some people make the effort to show up. Others make excuses." I didn't reply. I simply left the group chat. The doctors discharged me the following morning with prescriptions, follow-up appointments, and strict orders to rest. I took a rideshare home, settled into my apartment, and made a decision. If Maddie truly believed I'd never put her first, despite the years of weekend visits when I'd drive 5 hours each way, despite the college tuition payments that kept me working 60-hour weeks, despite the apartment in Boston I'd helped her rent so she could be closer to campus, then perhaps it was time she understood what my support actually meant. I opened my laptop, ignoring the pain that radiated from my shoulder as I typed. One by one, I logged into accounts, made phone calls, sent emails. By noon, I'd canceled everything: her tuition payments for graduate school, the rent for her apartment, the insurance on the car I'd bought her for her 21st birthday, and the credit cards I'd been paying off each month. Then I turned off my phone, took 2 of the prescribed pain pills, and fell into the first dreamless sleep I'd had in years. 4 hours later, I woke to the sound of someone pounding on my apartment door. The digital clock beside my bed read 4:17 p.m. I sat up slowly, my body protesting every movement, and shuffled to the door in sweatpants and a loose button-up I couldn't fully close over the bandages. Through the peephole, I saw Rebecca, my ex-wife, Maddie's mother, her face flushed and hair disheveled. For a moment, I considered not answering, but something in her expression made me unlock the door. She started talking before I had fully opened it. "David, what the heck do you think you're?" Her words died in her throat as she took in my appearance. Her eyes widened at the stitches on my forehead, the sling supporting my right arm, the careful way I was standing to minimize the pain in my ribs. "Oh my gosh," she whispered, her anger visibly deflating. "You really were in an accident." "Come in, Rebecca," I said quietly, stepping aside. She entered hesitantly, her gaze never leaving my injuries. The apartment was small but neat, a 1-bedroom I'd moved into after our divorce 5 years ago. I'd never bothered to find somewhere larger. What was the point? Maddie had only visited a handful of times. "Coffee?" I offered, moving toward the kitchen. Rebecca shook her head. "David, why didn't you tell us how serious it was?" I almost laughed. I tried. No one was interested in listening. But this. She gestured at my injuries. Maddie said you called with some story about a fender bender. Is that what she heard? I eased myself onto a bar stool at the kitchen counter. I told her I was in the hospital after a crash on I-95. I was trying to make the drive overnight to be there in the morning. Rebecca's expression shifted from shock to something more complicated, a mixture of disbelief and dawning realization. Janet said you probably just forgot or had work. Of course she did. I reached for the bottle of water on the counter, my movement stiff. Rebecca, why are you here? You could have called. Your phone is off, she said accusingly. And Maddie is having a complete meltdown. The university finance office called her about the tuition payment being stopped. Then her landlord called about the rent. Then her credit cards were declined at lunch. She crossed her arms. What are you doing, David? I met her gaze steadily. Taking Maddie at her word. She doesn't want to see me again, doesn't believe I put her first, thinks I'm irresponsible. So I'm stepping back completely. By financially ruining her? Rebecca's voice rose sharply. By letting her stand on her own 2 feet, I corrected. She's 22 years old, Rebecca. She has a bachelor's degree from Boston University. She can get a job, take out loans like other students, find roommates to split the rent. Rebecca stared at me as if I'd grown a second head. She's in graduate school. How is she supposed to manage all that and study? The same way thousands of other graduate students do, I said. The same way I did, working nights while getting my MBA. I paused, feeling a wave of exhaustion. Or the same way you did, with your parents covering everything. That hit a nerve. Rebecca's face flushed. That's not fair. Isn't it? I asked quietly. Look around, Rebecca. This is what I can afford after paying for Maddie's education, her apartment, her car, her lifestyle. I live in a 1-bedroom apartment and work 60 hours a week so she doesn't have to take out loans or get roommates or drive a used car. Rebecca's eyes darted around the modest space, taking in the sparse furnishings, the lack of luxury. I could see her making mental calculations, remembering the checks I'd written over the years. I thought. With your job? She began. My job pays well, I acknowledged. But not well enough to maintain 2 households at the level you and Maddie expect while also saving for retirement or, God forbid, taking a vacation. Rebecca sank onto the couch, her anger seemingly replaced by confusion. So this is about money? No, I said firmly. This is about respect. About acknowledgement. About not being treated like an ATM that dispenses not just cash but also blame and scorn. I felt my voice growing tighter. I nearly died 2 days ago, Rebecca. The truck hit my car at 70 miles an hour. And when I called our daughter from the hospital to tell her I couldn't make her graduation, she told me she didn't care and didn't want to see me again. Rebecca had the grace to look ashamed. She was upset, David. You know how important this was to her. It was important to me too, I said. Important enough that I was driving through the night after a full day of work to be there. She didn't know that. Because she didn't ask, I said simply. She assumed the worst about me. So did you. So did Janet. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment. What do you want, David? An apology? I shook my head slowly. I want Maddie to understand that actions and words have consequences. That relationships, even between parents and children, require mutual respect. So you're punishing her. I'm respecting her wishes, I corrected. She doesn't want me in her life? Fine. But my financial support was part of my presence in her life. She doesn't get to banish me personally while keeping my wallet accessible. Rebecca stood up abruptly. You know she can't afford that apartment or her tuition on her own. Then she has decisions to make, I said. Just like I've had to make decisions for years. Priorities to set. Sacrifices to consider. She's going to hate you for this, Rebecca warned. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Apparently, she already does. Rebecca moved toward the door, then paused, her hand on the knob. She turned back to look at me, really look at me, perhaps for the first time in years. You've changed, David. Nearly dying will do that, I said. After she left, I turned my phone back on. The missed calls had climbed to 63. There were 37 text messages, most from Maddie, the latest one reading simply, Dad, please answer. We need to talk. I placed the phone back on the counter without responding and went to take another pain pill. Tomorrow would be soon enough to deal with the fallout. Tonight, I needed rest. The next morning, I woke to a pounding headache and the distant sound of my phone ringing. I ignored it, focusing instead on making coffee one-handed and taking my medication. My body felt like one massive bruise, and the simple act of showering and changing the bandages had left me exhausted. I was halfway through my second cup of coffee when there was a knock at the door, softer than Rebecca's had been, almost hesitant. I knew before looking that it would be Maddie. She stood in the hallway, her eyes red-rimmed and puffy. Her dark hair, so like mine, was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she wore the same Boston University sweatshirt she did since freshman year. She looked younger than her 22 years, more vulnerable. "Dad," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Her eyes widened as she took in my injuries, her hand flying to cover her mouth. "Oh my gosh." I stepped back to let her in, saying nothing. She entered slowly, her gaze never leaving my face, the stitches on my forehead, the sling supporting my arm. "Mom said you were hurt, but I didn't realize." "What can I do for you, Maddie?" I asked quietly. Her eyes filled with tears. "Dad, I'm sorry. I didn't know. I thought you were just making excuses again." "Again?" I raised an eyebrow. "When have I ever made excuses about something this important?" She blinked, confusion crossing her features. You've missed things before." "Name one," I challenged, lowering myself carefully onto the couch. "My piano recital in 10th grade, she said immediately. "I called you the day before to explain that I had food poisoning and was in the emergency room," I said. "I sent flowers to the auditorium." She frowned. "What about my debate championship junior year?" "I was there, Maddie. I sat in the back because I arrived late after driving straight from a client meeting in Philadelphia. I gave you the silver pen afterward, remember? The one that had belonged to my father." Her frown deepened. "My 21st birthday dinner? Which you changed from Saturday to Friday at the last minute," I said. "I had a flight booked that couldn't be changed. I offered to take you to dinner the following weekend instead, but you said you had plans with friends." With each example, I could see her certainty wavering. These were the moments she'd held onto, the evidence of my supposed negligence and irresponsibility. But with each one I countered, I watched her narrative begin to crumble. "But Mom and Grandma always said." She started, then stopped herself. I nodded slowly. "What did they say, Maddie?" She sank into the armchair across from me. "That you always put work first. That you chose your career over us. That." She swallowed hard. "That you left because you didn't want the responsibility of a family." The familiar pain twisted in my chest, sharper than my physical injuries. "And you believed them. You were never there to tell me otherwise," she said defensively. "You moved away." "I moved to an apartment 20 minutes from our house," I corrected. "Your mother got the house in the divorce settlement, along with primary custody. I saw you every other weekend and Wednesday nights for dinner, exactly as the agreement stipulated, until you started canceling to spend time with friends or for school activities." She looked away. "I was busy." "So was I said softly. "But I never canceled on you, Maddie. Not once." The silence between us stretched, filled with years of misunderstandings and half-truths. Finally, Maddie spoke, her voice small. "Why did you cancel everything yesterday?" I considered my words carefully. "Because you said you didn't want to see me again. Because you accused me of never putting you first, despite evidence to the contrary. Because you weren't willing to hear my explanation for missing your graduation, an explanation that involved me nearly dying while trying to be there for you." Tears spilled down her cheeks. I was hurt. I was embarrassed. Everyone else's parents were there. "I understand that," I said. "But your reaction wasn't to express disappointment or even anger. It was to cut me out of your life completely. To decide, based on one missed event, one I missed because I was unconscious in a hospital, that I had never prioritized you." "I didn't mean it," she whispered. "Didn't you?" I asked. "Because from where I'm sitting, it seemed to fit perfectly with the narrative you, your mother, and your grandmother have constructed about me over the years." She didn't deny it, which told me everything. "Dad, please turn the payments back on," she said, wiping her eyes. "I can't afford the apartment without your help. The tuition bill is due next week. My credit card got declined at the grocery store yesterday." I studied her face, the face I'd loved since the moment she was born, the face I'd do anything to protect. Almost anything. "No," I said finally. Her eyes widened. "What?" "No," I repeated. "I'm not turning the payments back on. Not yet, anyway." "But, Maddie, do you have any idea how much money I've spent supporting you over the past 4 years?" I asked. "Your undergraduate tuition at Boston University was over $70,000 a year. Your apartment in Boston costs me $24,000 a year. The car insurance, the credit cards, the flights home for holidays, the extra spending money, it adds up to well over $100,000 annually." She stared at me in shock. "But, you make good money." "I make about $240,000 before taxes," I said. "After taxes, alimony to your mother, and all your expenses, I live on about $40,000 a year." The color drained from her face. "That can't be right." "Check my tax returns if you don't believe me," I said. "They're in the filing cabinet in the spare closet. I've kept copies of everything." She sat in stunned silence. "I'm not telling you this to make you feel guilty," I continued. I've never regretted a penny spent on your education or your well-being. What I regret is that somewhere along the line, you stopped seeing it as support and started seeing it as an obligation, my penance for some imagined paternal failure. I didn't know, she said weakly. You never asked, I replied. Just like you never asked about the accident before deciding I was making excuses. Just like you never questioned your mother's or grandmother's version of our family history. Maddie looked down at her hands. So what happens now? You just cut me off completely? No, I said. Now we renegotiate our relationship, as adults. She looked up, confused. What does that mean? It means I'm willing to continue supporting your education, but with conditions, I explained. First, you need to find a cheaper apartment with roommates. Second, you'll need to get a part-time job to cover your personal expenses, the credit cards, the car insurance, the extras. Third, we're going to have weekly dinners where we actually talk about our lives, our relationship, your childhood, the divorce, all of it. And if I don't agree? She challenged, a flash of the defiance I'd seen 2 days ago returning to her eyes. Then you're on your own financially, I said simply. You can take out student loans like millions of other graduate students. You can work full-time and study part-time. You can move back in with your mother. You have options, Maddie. They're just not as comfortable as the ones I've been providing. She was quiet for a long time, considering. I could see the calculations happening behind her eyes, not just financial ones, but emotional ones too. Weighing the cost of her pride against the reality of her situation. Weekly dinners? She finally asked. I nodded. Every Tuesday. We can alternate choosing the restaurant. And I really have to get roommates? Your current apartment costs $2,000 a month, I said. With roommates in a less trendy neighborhood, you could cut that to $700 or less. She made a face. I like living alone. So do I said. It's a luxury, not a necessity. Another long pause. I'd need to find a place soon. The rent is due in 2 weeks. I can help you look, I offered. Once the doctor clears me to drive again. She glanced at my injuries, guilt flashing across her face. Does it hurt? A lot, I mean? Yes, I answered honestly. The truck hit my side of the car going 70 miles an hour. I have 3 broken ribs, a dislocated shoulder, 27 stitches across my chest and forehead, and more bruises than I can count. The doctor said if the impact had been a few inches to the left, I would have died instantly. Her breath caught, and fresh tears welled in her eyes. And I didn't even let you explain. No, I said quietly. You didn't? I'm sorry, Dad, she whispered. I'm so sorry. I felt something tight in my chest begin to loosen, not forgiveness, not yet, but the possibility of it. I know, Maddie. She stood and came to sit beside me on the couch, careful not to jostle my injured side. After a moment's hesitation, she leaned her head against my good shoulder, a gesture she hadn't made since she was little. I'll find roommates, she said softly. And get a job. And we can do Tuesday dinners. I rested my cheek against the top of her head. Good. But you have to promise me something too, she added. What's that? You have to start telling me when things are hard for you, she said. When you're struggling or making sacrifices. I can't know what I don't know, Dad. It was a fair point. I'd spent years shielding her from the financial realities, the sacrifices, the hard choices. I'd wanted her to focus on her education, to have opportunities I'd never had. But in protecting her from those truths, I'd allowed a different narrative to take root. I promise, I said. We sat in silence for a while, the weight of years of misunderstandings between us. It wasn't fixed, not by a long shot. But it was a beginning. Can I stay for a while? She asked eventually. Help you out maybe? You must be having trouble doing things one-handed. I'd like that, I said. She nodded against my shoulder. I need to call Mom and tell her I'm staying. And I should probably start looking at apartment listings. And job applications, I reminded her. She sighed dramatically, but I felt her smile against my shoulder. And job applications. As she pulled out her phone, I closed my eyes, the pain medication making me drowsy. There would be more difficult conversations ahead, with Maddie, with Rebecca, with Janet. Old wounds reopened, old stories re-examined. It wouldn't be easy, and there would be resistance. But for the first time in years, I felt something like hope, that maybe, just maybe, we could rebuild our relationship on honesty rather than obligation. On mutual respect rather than guilt and resentment. It wasn't the relationship I'd imagined having with my daughter. But perhaps it could be something more authentic, more balanced. Something that might actually last. 3 weeks later, I sat across from Maddie at a small Italian restaurant downtown. My sling was gone, though I still moved carefully to avoid aggravating my healing ribs. It was our third Tuesday dinner, and already the awkwardness was beginning to fade. So, I said, taking a sip of water, how's the new apartment hunt going? Maddie tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Good, actually. I found a 3-bedroom place near campus. It's an older building, but the rooms are decent sized. I'd be sharing with 2 other grad students, Emma from my program and her friend Lily who's in law school. That sounds promising, I said. What's the rent like? $650 each, utilities included, she replied, looking pleased with herself. And it's a 12-month lease, but Emma and Lily both plan to stay through summer, so I wouldn't be stuck paying for an empty room if I went home for a few weeks. I nodded approvingly. That's smart thinking. When would you move in? 1st of next month, she said. I've already given notice at my current place. The landlord was pretty understanding once I explained the situation. And the job search? I asked, cutting into my chicken parmesan. A smile spread across her face. I got one. The university library was hiring student assistants for the reference desk. It's 15 hours a week, works around my class schedule, and they pay $14 an hour. That's great, Maddie, I said, genuinely impressed. Between that and the money you'll save on rent, you should be able to cover your car insurance and personal expenses. She nodded. And I closed the Amex account. I'm just keeping one credit card for emergencies, and I'm paying it off each month myself. She paused, then added shyly, I made a budget spreadsheet. Do you want to see it? I'd love to, I said, warming at her enthusiasm. This was a side of Maddie I hadn't seen before, practical, resourceful, engaged with her own financial reality. As she pulled up the spreadsheet on her phone and handed it to me, I felt a wave of something that might have been pride. 3 weeks ago, she'd been devastated by the idea of finding roommates and working part-time. Now, she was taking ownership of her situation. I scrolled through her carefully categorized expenses and income projections. This looks really solid, Maddie. You've thought of everything. She beamed at the praise. I had to learn how to use Excel first. YouTube tutorials, she added with a small laugh. I handed her phone back. Your mother called me yesterday, I said, changing the subject. Maddie's expression immediately guarded. What did she want? To tell me she's sorry, I replied. For her part in how things unfolded after the accident. And for other things too. Maddie raised an eyebrow, surprised. Really? Mom apologized? I nodded. She said you two had a long talk about the divorce, about the years after. About the narratives that got established. Maddie looked down at her pasta, pushing it around with her fork. Yeah, we did. It was intense. I asked her a lot of questions about things I always believed were true. Like why you moved out, why you worked so much during the marriage. And what did she tell you? I asked cautiously. Maddie met my eyes. She said she was the one who asked for the divorce, not you. That you wanted to try counseling, but she'd already decided. And that you worked those long hours because she kept increasing the household expenses, the bigger house, the private school for me, the country club membership. I remained silent, letting her continue. She also said Grandma Janet never liked you, even before the divorce, and that a lot of what Grandma told me about you wasn't true. Maddie's voice had grown quieter. Mom said she never corrected Grandma because it was easier to let me be angry at you than to admit her own part in everything. I took a deep breath. This was more honesty from Rebecca than I'd expected. Your mother and I both made mistakes in our marriage, I said carefully. And in how we handled things afterward. But you never badmouthed her to me, Maddie observed. Not once. No, I agreed. That wouldn't have been fair to you. Maddie was quiet for a moment, seemingly lost in thought. Dad, can I ask you something? Something I should have asked years ago? Of course. Why did you agree to let Mom have primary custody? If you wanted to be more involved in my life, why did you only take the standard visitation? It was a fair question, one I'd been expecting since our conversations began, but it still made my stomach clench. The truth? I asked, and she nodded. Your mother threatened to fight for full custody if I didn't agree to her terms. She had resources I didn't have, her parents' money, their connections. And she had a narrative already in place about me being an absent workaholic who prioritized my career. Maddie's eyes widened. She wouldn't have one, though. Right? I shrugged slightly. Maybe not. But the fight would have been ugly and expensive, and you would have been caught in the middle. I decided that seeing you every other weekend and Wednesday nights was better than risking not seeing you at all, or putting you through a custody battle. So you gave in, she said, a note of disappointment in her voice. I made a calculation, I corrected. I decided your peace of mind was worth more than my pride or my desired custody arrangement. Was it the right choice? I don't know. But it's the choice I made, with the information and resources I had at the time. She absorbed this, nodding slowly. Thank you for telling me the truth. Always, I promised. From now on, always. As we finished our meal, I noticed a lightness between us that hadn't been there before. Not just because of this conversation, but because of all the conversations we'd had over the past 3 weeks. The walls were coming down, brick by painful brick. Next Tuesday is my turn to pick, she reminded me as we left the restaurant. I was thinking that Thai place near the park? Sounds perfect, I said, walking her to her car. Before getting in, she hesitated, then gave me a careful hug, mindful of my healing ribs. Thanks, Dad. For dinner and everything else. You're welcome, Maddie, I said, hugging her back. As I watched her drive away, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: grief for the years lost to misunderstandings and manipulations, anger at how easily the truth had been twisted, but also hope for what we were building now. Something new, something honest. It wasn't the relationship I'd imagined having with my daughter when she was born, when I'd held her tiny form and made silent promises about the father I would be. Life had taken us on a different, more complicated path. But as I drove home to my small apartment, I realized that perhaps this hard-won connection, built on truth and respect rather than obligation and guilt, might ultimately be stronger than what we would have had otherwise. The payments for Maddie's tuition had resumed. I'd followed through on my promise, just as she was following through on hers. But the difference now was that she understood the sacrifice behind those payments, and I understood that financial support alone wasn't enough. We both had to show up, to listen, to be honest. The road ahead wouldn't be perfect. Rebecca and Janet would resist the changing dynamics. Old habits and hurts would surface. But for the first time in years, I felt like my daughter and I were walking forward together, rather than drifting steadily apart. Sometimes, I reflected, it takes nearly losing everything, including your life, to find clarity about what matters most. And sometimes, the hardest thing isn't walking away, but finding the courage to rebuild what's broken. 6 months later, I stood in the doorway of Maddie's new apartment, a housewarming gift tucked under my arm. The place was modest but charming, an older building with character, hardwood floors, and large windows that filled the space with natural light. It felt alive in a way her sleek, expensive previous apartment never had, with mismatched furniture, potted plants, and photos covering the walls. What do you think? Maddie asked, watching my reaction as I took it all in. I think it's very you, I said honestly. She grinned. Right? Emma and Lily are amazing roommates. They're actually cooking for everyone tonight. They insisted you stay for dinner to meet their parents too. Kind of a pseudo-family dinner. I'd like that, I said, handing her the wrapped package. This is for the apartment. She tore off the paper eagerly, revealing a framed black and white photograph of Boston's skyline at night, one I'd taken years ago during my amateur photography phase. Dad, this is beautiful, she said, running her fingers over the frame. Did you take this? I nodded. Back when you were in high school. I thought it might fit your new place. It's perfect. She immediately moved to hang it in a prominent spot in the living room. How's the new office? She asked over her shoulder. Good, I replied. The shorter commute makes a big difference. And the slightly reduced salary is worth the extra time. That had been my own change over the past 6 months, taking a position with a smaller firm closer to home, one that paid about 15% less but required fewer hours and less travel. It meant adjusting my own budget, but the improvement in my quality of life had been immediate. Mom said you're dating someone? Maddie asked casually, though I could hear the curiosity in her voice. I've been on a few dates with someone, yes, I admitted. Her name is Claire. She's a high school English teacher. Maddie turned to face me, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Is it serious? I shrugged. Too early to tell. But I like her. She's straightforward, no games. It's refreshing. Good, Maddie said firmly. You deserve that. The doorbell rang, and Maddie went to answer it. I heard greetings and introductions as her roommate's parents arrived. Standing in her living room, surrounded by the evidence of her new independence, I felt a profound sense of peace. The past 6 months hadn't been easy. There had been setbacks, arguments with Rebecca, difficult confrontations with Janet, moments when old patterns threatened to reassert themselves. There had been times when Maddie struggled with her reduced circumstances, when the reality of working while studying felt overwhelming, when she resented the changes I'd forced. But through it all, we'd maintained our Tuesday dinners. We'd kept talking, kept being honest, kept showing up for each other. And slowly, something new had emerged from the ashes of our old relationship, something built on mutual respect and understanding rather than obligation and resentment. As I joined the gathering in the small dining area, accepting a glass of wine from Emma's father and answering questions about my work from Lily's mother, I watched Maddie move confidently through the space she had created. She looked happy, centered in a way I hadn't seen before. Later, as dinner was winding down and conversation flowed easily around the table, Maddie caught my eye from across the room and mouthed silently, "Thank you." I didn't have to ask what she meant. She wasn't thanking me for the photograph, or for coming to dinner, or even for continuing to pay her tuition. She was thanking me for the hard reset 6 months ago, the painful but necessary awakening that had led us here. I smiled back, giving her a small nod. In that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that canceling those payments, the act that had seemed so harsh, so punitive at the time, had been the right decision. Not because it had hurt her or taught her a lesson, but because it had forced us both to confront the truth of our relationship and rebuild it on more solid ground. Sometimes the most loving thing a parent can do is to stand firm, to insist on truth, to demand respect, even when it feels like cruelty in the moment. Sometimes the hardest choices lead to the most healing outcomes. As I drove home that night, I thought about the missed calls from 6 months ago, 48 of them, stacked on my phone screen like dominoes. At the time, they had seemed like evidence of panic, of a young woman suddenly confronted with the consequences of her words. Now I understood they were something else entirely, the first tentative steps toward reconciliation. Toward the honest, balanced relationship we had today. The next morning, I woke early, sunlight streaming through blinds I'd forgotten to close. For a moment, I lay still, listening to the sounds of the apartment building coming to life, distant footsteps, a door closing, the hum of the refrigerator. My phone buzzed on the nightstand with a text message. "Thanks for coming last night. Roommate dinner wasn't as awkward as I feared. Everyone loved you. I smiled, typing back, "I had a good time. Your roommates and their parents are nice people." 3 dots appeared immediately, followed by, "Dad, I've been thinking about something. Can we have coffee this weekend? Saturday maybe?" An unexpected request outside our usual Tuesday routine. "Sure. The place near your apartment? 10 a.m.? Perfect. See you then." The rest of the week passed in a blur of work meetings and a pleasant dinner with Claire on Thursday evening. By Saturday morning, I found myself wondering what Maddie wanted to discuss that couldn't wait until our regular dinner. She was already at the coffee shop when I arrived, 2 steaming mugs on the table in front of her. She'd remembered how I took my coffee, black with 1 sugar, a small detail that somehow meant more than it should. "Hey," I said, sliding into the chair across from her. "Hey," she replied, pushing my mug toward me. "Thanks for meeting me." "Of course," I said, taking a sip. "Everything okay?" She nodded, then seemed to reconsider. "Yes. No. I mean, it's not bad, just. I've been doing a lot of thinking." I waited, giving her space to continue at her own pace. "Do you remember when I was little, before the divorce, and you used to take me to the Science Museum on the first Sunday of every month?" she asked. The question surprised me. "Of course I remember. You loved the butterfly garden." A soft smile crossed her face. "I did. I used to get so excited the night before, I could hardly sleep. You'd have your clothes laid out and your backpack packed with your notebook and colored pencils," I recalled. "And you'd insist on bringing your own magnifying glass even though they had better ones there." She laughed. "I forgot about the magnifying glass. Grandpa gave me that for my birthday." "Your mother's father," I confirmed. "One of the few gifts he ever gave you that wasn't some princess thing." "Yeah," she said, her expression turning more serious. "The thing is, Dad, I've been trying to piece together my childhood memories, what really happened versus what I was told happened. And there are these gaps. Like the museum trips. They just stopped after the divorce, and I always thought it was because you didn't want to take me anymore." I felt a familiar tightness in my chest. "Maddie, those trips meant everything to me. I tried to continue them. Every month, I would suggest it during my weekend, and every month you'd say you were too busy or had plans with friends or homework." Her eyes widened slightly. "Did I? I don't remember that." "You were 13 when it stopped," I said gently. "Right around the time you started spending more weekends at your grandmother's house." Understanding dawned on her face. "When Grandma Janet started telling me you only wanted visitation because the court ordered it. That you'd be relieved if I canceled." I nodded, the old hurt surfacing despite my best efforts. "And Rebecca, your mom, never contradicted her." "No," Maddie said quietly. "She didn't." We sat in silence for a moment, the ambient noise of the coffee shop washing over us. "I found my old science notebooks," she finally said. "From those museum trips. You used to write little notes in the margins, observations you had, questions for me to think about. I never noticed them back then." "You were focused on the butterflies," I said with a small smile. "But you noticed everything," she said, meeting my eyes. "You paid attention to what interested me, what scared me, what made me laugh. You were really there, Dad, in a way I didn't understand until now." I swallowed against the sudden tightness in my throat. "I tried to be." "I know that now," she said. "And I'm sorry it took me so long to see it." She reached into her bag and pulled out a worn notebook with a faded butterfly sticker on the cover. "I found this one from when I was 8. You wrote something here that I wanted to ask you about." She flipped to a page marked with a sticky note and slid the notebook across the table. In the margin next to Maddie's childish drawing of a blue morpho butterfly, my younger self had written, "The butterfly doesn't know how beautiful it is. Sometimes the most extraordinary things are invisible to themselves." "You wrote that," she said softly. What did you mean? I remembered that day clearly, Maddie standing transfixed in front of the butterfly exhibit, her expression one of pure wonder. I meant you, I said simply. You were so focused on the butterflies, so amazed by them, that you couldn't see how amazing you were. How your curiosity and excitement made you shine brighter than anything in that museum. Tears filled her eyes. Dad. I still mean it, I added quietly. Even now, she wiped her eyes quickly. The reason I wanted to meet is because I've been thinking about studying entomology. Butterflies, I said, understanding immediately. She nodded. There's a summer research program at the university. It would mean changing my focus a bit, adding some biology courses. But when I found these notebooks, something just clicked. Like I'd been trying to force myself into a path that wasn't quite right. And what do you think now? I asked. I think maybe those museum trips shaped me more than I realized, she said. Those butterflies were my first love. Maybe they should be my life's work too. Pride swelled in my chest. I think you'd be brilliant at it. The program costs extra, she added hesitantly. Not covered by regular tuition. I smiled. How much? 4,000, she said. I've been saving for my job, but I'd still be short. I'll cover it, I said without hesitation. But I want something in return. She raised an eyebrow. What's that? Take me with you to the Science Museum tomorrow, I said. First Sunday of the month. Her face lit up with a smile so bright it rivaled her childhood excitement. Deal. As we finished our coffee and made plans for the next day, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't expected. 6 months ago, I'd cut off her financial support out of hurt and principle, forcing her to confront the reality of our relationship. Now, I was offering to fund a new dream, not out of obligation, but because I believed in her, because I wanted to support this authentic path she was discovering. The money wasn't the point. It never had been. The point was the recognition behind it, the mutual respect, the honest communication, the genuine connection. The next day, walking through the butterfly garden with my grown daughter, watching her take notes with the same concentration she'd had as a child, I realized that our relationship had come full circle. Not back to what it was before the divorce, before the misunderstandings and manipulations, but to something new, a mature relationship between two adults who chose to be in each other's lives. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't what I'd imagined when I first held her as an infant. But it was real, and it was ours, hard-won and precious for having almost been lost. 1 year after those missed calls that had changed everything, I found myself sitting in an unfamiliar auditorium, this time with no broken bones or stitches. The program in my hand read Graduate Research Symposium with Maddie's name listed as one of the presenters. Next to me sat Rebecca, who had arrived just minutes before the event began. We nodded to each other cordially, the tension between us lessened by time and by the shared focus on our daughter. She's nervous, Rebecca whispered as the lights dimmed. She called me 3 times this morning. She called me twice, I replied with a small smile. I told her she'd be brilliant. Rebecca gave me a sidelong glance. I told her the same thing. It was a small moment of parental synchronicity, something we'd rarely experienced even during our marriage. Perhaps that was progress too. The department chair stepped to the podium and began introducing the program. I let my mind drift, thinking about the journey of the past year. The financial reset that had seemed so harsh at the time had cascaded into a complete relationship reset, not just with Maddie, but in subtle ways with Rebecca too. Janet remained a challenge. My former mother-in-law had never forgiven me for what she called the financial abandonment of her granddaughter. She still refused to be in the same room with me, still fed Maddie subtle poison about my character when they were alone together. But now, Maddie recognized it for what it was. She'd developed a kind of emotional immunity to Janet's manipulations, not cutting her grandmother out of her life, but holding her at a healthier distance. My relationship with Claire had deepened over the months. She'd been there through the continued ups and downs of my reconciliation with Maddie, offering perspective from her years as a teacher watching family dynamics play out in her students. Last week, she'd moved in with me, the first time I'd shared my living space with anyone since the divorce. A light touch on my arm brought me back to the present. Rebecca leaned closer. She's up next, she whispered. Maddie walked confidently to the podium, dressed professionally in a blazer I recognized as one Claire had helped her pick out. Her hair was pulled back, her expression serious but composed. She began speaking about her research on butterfly migration patterns and climate change, her voice growing stronger with each slide. Pride swelled in my chest as I watched her field questions from faculty with thoughtful, articulate responses. This wasn't just my little girl who had once pressed her face to the glass at the butterfly exhibit, this was a young scientist, passionate and knowledgeable about her subject. When the symposium ended, we found Maddie in the reception area, surrounded by classmates and professors. She spotted us and excused herself, making her way through the crowd. You came, she said, embracing her mother first, then me. Both of you. Of course we did, Rebecca replied. You were amazing up there. Absolutely brilliant, I agreed. Just like I said you would be. Maddie beamed at the praise. Dr. Winters wants me to consider applying for the PhD program. He thinks my research could be expanded into a dissertation. That's wonderful, I said. If that's what you want to do. I'm thinking about it, she said. It would be another 4 years, minimum. Rebecca frowned slightly. That's a long time to stay in school, Maddie. Have you thought about getting some real-world experience first? I recognized the tone, the subtle push, the implied judgment. Once, I would have countered immediately, creating a triangle of tension with Maddie caught in the middle. Now, I waited, curious to see how Maddie would respond. She didn't disappoint. I'm considering all my options, Mom, she said calmly. There are advantages to both paths. I don't have to decide right away. Rebecca seemed taken aback by the mature response, then nodded. Of course. I just want what's best for you. I know, Maddie said. You both do. In different ways sometimes, but I know that's what you want. It was a small moment, but significant, Maddie navigating the space between us without being swayed or manipulated, acknowledging our different perspectives without being torn apart by them. I need to talk to a few more faculty, she said, but can we all have dinner afterward? There's a new Thai place nearby I've been wanting to try. Rebecca glanced at me uncertainly. All of us? Yes, Maddie said firmly. All of us. After she walked away, Rebecca and I stood in awkward silence for a moment. We don't have to do this, Rebecca finally said. I can make an excuse. I considered it. Dinner with my ex-wife wasn't high on my list of preferred evening activities. But the look in Maddie's eyes, the hope there, had been unmistakable. Let's do it, I said. For her. Rebecca nodded slowly. For her. Later, as we sat at a corner table in the Thai restaurant, I watched Maddie animatedly describe her research plans, switching her gaze between Rebecca and me. There was an ease to her now that had been missing before, a confidence that came not just from academic success, but from emotional stability. The conversation flowed more smoothly than I'd expected. Rebecca asked thoughtful questions about Maddie's research. I shared stories from recent museum trips Maddie and I had taken. We carefully avoided any direct discussion of the past, focusing instead on Maddie's present and future. As the meal wound down, Maddie excused herself to use the restroom, leaving Rebecca and me alone at the table. You did the right thing, she said unexpectedly, her fingers tracing the rim of her water glass. A year ago, when you canceled everything. I was furious at the time, but you did the right thing. I hadn't expected that acknowledgement, not from Rebecca. Thank you for saying that. She's different now, Rebecca continued. More grounded. More independent. Less entitled. She looked up at me. She told me she's planning to pay you back someday. For the tuition, everything. That's not necessary, I said. I never expected that. I know, Rebecca said. But she wants to. She said it's important to her that you know she doesn't take it for granted anymore. I absorbed this, feeling a complex mix of emotions. She doesn't need to pay me back. Seeing her like this, happy, confident, pursuing something she loves, that's more than enough. Rebecca nodded, then hesitated before speaking again. I owe you an apology, David. A real one, not just for what happened after the accident. Rebecca, please, let me say this, she interrupted. I let my mother poison Maddie's view of you for years. I encouraged it sometimes, because it was easier than admitting my part in our problems. I told myself I was protecting her, but really, I was protecting myself, from guilt, from responsibility. She took a deep breath. I'm sorry. Truly. The apology caught me off guard, direct, unqualified, something Rebecca had rarely offered during our marriage or after. Thank you, I said simply. Maddie told me about your Tuesday dinners, she continued. How you've been talking through everything, the divorce, the years after. She says you've never spoken badly about me, even when she asked direct questions. That wouldn't have served any purpose, I said. Maybe not, but it would have been justified, Rebecca admitted. I didn't extend you the same courtesy. Before I could respond, Maddie returned to the table. She looked between us curiously, sensing the shift in atmosphere. Everything okay? She asked. Everything's fine, Rebecca assured her. Your father and I were just discussing how proud we are of you. It wasn't the whole truth, but it wasn't a lie either. As Maddie smiled, settling back into her chair, I realized that perhaps this was the best outcome I could have hoped for, not a perfect resolution to all the hurts of the past, but a new understanding, a mutual respect born of watching our daughter grow into the person she was meant to be. The path to this moment had been unconventional, sparked by a moment of justified anger after years of accumulated hurt. Canceling those payments had been an act of desperation, of self-preservation, of setting a boundary that should have been set years earlier. I couldn't have predicted the cascade of changes it would trigger, in Maddie, in myself, even in Rebecca. But sitting there, Watching my daughter's animated expression as she described her hopes for future research, seeing the pride in Rebecca's eyes that mirrored my own, I knew I wouldn't change any of it. Not the pain, not the confrontations, not the difficult conversations. Each had been a necessary step on the path to this new reality. When the check came, I reached for it, but Maddie's hand got there first. "My treat," she said firmly. "I got paid today." It was a small gesture, but it represented something much larger: her independence, her gratitude, her recognition of what support really meant. "Thank you, Maddie," I said, letting her have this moment. As we walked out of the restaurant into the cool evening air, Maddie linked her arm through mine on one side and her mother's on the other. For a brief moment, the three of us walked in sync, a family configuration we had rarely achieved even when we were officially a family. "Thanks for coming today," Maddie said. "Both of you. It meant a lot." "We wouldn't have missed it," Rebecca replied. "Not for anything," I added. Maddie squeezed my arm gently. "I know, Dad. I know that now." In that simple statement was everything I'd hoped for during those dark days after the accident: acknowledgement, understanding, belief. The journey from 48 missed calls to this moment had been longer and more complicated than I could have imagined, but as I looked at my daughter's profile in the fading light, I knew it had been worth every difficult step. Tomorrow, she would return to her research and classes. Rebecca would go back to her life, and I to mine with Claire. Our paths would continue to intersect through Maddie, sometimes smoothly, sometimes with friction. The past couldn't be erased, and Janet would likely continue to nurture old grievances. But something fundamental had shifted. Maddie had found her true passion, partly because of the reset our relationship had experienced. She had discovered her own strength, her ability to stand independently while still accepting support. And I had found a new way to be her father, not just the provider of financial security, but a true presence in her life, someone she talked to, listened to, respected. Sometimes the most loving thing a parent can do is to stand firm, to insist on truth, to demand respect, even when it feels like cruelty in the moment. Sometimes the hardest choices lead to the most healing outcomes. As Maddie hugged me goodbye in the parking lot, whispering, "Tuesday dinner as usual?" I felt the truth of that understanding settle deep in my bones. Tuesday dinner as usual, I confirmed. Wouldn't miss it. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't what I'd imagined when I first held her as an infant. But it was real, and it was ours, hard-won and precious for having almost been lost. And in the end, that was more than enough, it was everything. Story 2. I told my son he was a failure and that nobody in the family ever wanted him after he refused to be like his perfect brother. My wife added, "Finally, someone's being honest about how we all feel." My father agreed, "Some children just don't measure up to family standards." Now he's living with my estranged brother, calling him Dad, and says he'll never acknowledge me again. But when I went to demand he come home, my brother revealed something that made my blood run cold. I still can't believe the words came out of my mouth. They hung in the air like poison, and I watched my 17-year-old son's face crumple in slow motion. His eyes, my eyes, the same hazel shade I see in the mirror every morning, widened first in shock, then narrowed in pain as the color drained from his face. Mason didn't cry. He didn't yell back. He just stood there, absolutely still, as if the slightest movement might shatter him completely. The college brochures for state lay scattered across our dining room table, the safety school I'd mocked minutes earlier when he'd announced he wasn't applying to Princeton like his brother. The Princeton application sat untouched beside them, the deadline tomorrow. The room felt suffocatingly hot despite the autumn chill seeping through the windows of our colonial house in Westfield. "Dad, Mason started to speak, his voice barely above a whisper. But Sarah, my wife, cut him off with a sound that was half laugh, half sigh. "Finally, someone's being honest about how we all feel." She flicked her manicured hand dismissively through the air. This endless coddling hasn't done him any favors. I remember glancing at her, momentarily startled by the coldness in her voice. In 15 years of marriage, I'd never heard her speak to either of our sons that way. But in that moment, her words felt like validation. Like permission. Then my father cleared his throat from his seat at the head of the table. At 73, he still commanded the room, still made me feel like a child seeking approval. "Some children just don't measure up to family standards," he said, his eyes never leaving his youngest grandson. "The Caldwells have attended Ivy League schools for 3 generations. Your brother understood that tradition." Mason's gaze darted between the three of us, as if searching for a single sympathetic face. Finding none, something shifted in his expression, something hardened. He straightened his shoulders, picked up his phone from the table, and walked out without another word. I let him go. I told myself he needed to cool off, that we all did. I told myself that tough love was sometimes necessary, that my own father had pushed me just as hard. I didn't know that Mason had already packed a bag that morning, sensing what would happen when he finally stood his ground. I didn't know he'd already reached out to my brother, Thomas, whom I hadn't spoken to in nearly 20 years. I didn't know that moment would be the last time Mason would call me dad. By the time I realized what had happened, it was too late. My son was gone, and in his place was a hole that grew wider every day, a hole filled with questions I was too proud to ask and answers I was terrified to hear. Our family portrait still hung in the foyer, taken 3 years ago on the stone steps of Princeton during Camden's college tour. Camden, my firstborn, stood tall and confident in a navy blazer that matched mine exactly. Sarah leaned slightly into my side, her smile wide and perfect. Mason stood slightly apart, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. I'd never noticed that before. "He'll be back by dinner," Sarah said the evening Mason left, more annoyed than concerned as she checked her watch. "He's always been dramatic." But dinner came and went. When I tried calling his cell phone, it went straight to voicemail. By 10 o'clock, concern had finally begun to creep in. I called his 3 closest friends, who each claimed they hadn't seen him. The last one, Jake, hesitated just a moment too long before denying knowledge of Mason's whereabouts. "Listen, if you're covering for him," I started. "Mr. Caldwell," Jake interrupted, his voice surprisingly firm for a teenager speaking to an adult, "I think maybe you should ask yourself why Mason wouldn't want you to know where he is." I hung up, stunned by the implied accusation. Sarah suggested we wait until morning before doing anything drastic. "He's 17, not 7, she reminded me. "He's probably just trying to scare us." But at 1 in the morning, my phone lit up with a text message. Not from Mason, but from my brother Thomas. "Mason is safe. He's with me. He needs space." I stared at the message for a full minute, not quite comprehending. Thomas? My brother who lived 3 hours away in Connecticut? My brother whom I hadn't spoken to since our mother's funeral? My brother who'd rejected everything our family stood for when he walked away from our father's investment firm to become a high school teacher? I called him immediately. He didn't answer. I texted back demanding an explanation, demanding he bring my son home. No response. "Thomas?" Sarah asked when I told her, frowning in confusion. "Your hippie brother? Why would Mason go to him? They barely know each other." That was the question that kept me awake until dawn. Mason and Thomas had only met a handful of times at family events when Mason was much younger. What could have possibly made my son reach out to him instead of coming to me? And how had they maintained a relationship without my knowledge? The answer arrived in the form of an email from Thomas the next morning. Short, formal, and devastating. "Robert, Mason will be staying with me indefinitely. He has explained the situation, and I support his decision to leave. He will continue his education at Danbury High School, where arrangements have already been made for his transfer. He will apply to colleges of his choosing. He is safe and, given time, he may heal. Do not attempt to force him to return. He is nearly 18, and I will support his petition for emancipation if necessary. Thomas." I read the email aloud to Sarah and my father over breakfast, my voice shaking with rage by the final line. The crystal chandelier above our dining table cast prism-like shadows across their faces. Camden, home from Princeton for the weekend, sat silent and wide-eyed beside Sarah. "Emancipation?" my father thundered, slamming his palm against the mahogany table. "Has everyone lost their minds? The boy has responsibilities, expectations." Sarah's lips pressed into a thin line. "This is ridiculous. Thomas has no right. Call our attorney." But it was Camden who surprised me. "Dad," he said quietly, "what exactly did you say to Mason before he left?" Something in his tone made me defensive. I told him the truth. That he was throwing away his future, that he was letting down the family. Camden looked down at his untouched breakfast. "And you called him a failure?" I said he was acting like one, I corrected, though the distinction suddenly seemed meaningless. "Why are you taking his side? He walked out on this family." Camden met my gaze then, and for a brief, unsettling moment, I couldn't read my own son's expression. "I'm not taking sides," he said carefully. "I just think there might be more to this than Mason being dramatic." For the next week, I tried everything to bring Mason home. I left voicemails that started as demands and gradually shifted to pleas. I sent emails apologizing for any misunderstanding. I even drove to Thomas's address in Danbury one afternoon, only to find no one home and neighbors who claimed not to know when they'd return. Meanwhile, Sarah contacted our lawyer, who explained that with Mason nearly 18 and no evidence of endangerment, legal intervention would be complicated and potentially damaging. Courts generally favor the child's wishes at this age, he explained uncomfortably. And forcing the issue might just push him further away. My father had a simpler solution. "Cut him off," he said matter-of-factly over drinks in his study. "No access to his college fund, no car, no credit card. He'll come home when reality sets in." The financial leverages were implemented the next day. Mason's credit card was cancelled, his college fund temporarily frozen. It felt wrong, using money as a weapon against my own child, but I told myself it was for his own good. That sometimes parenting meant making difficult choices. Camden called his brother daily from college, the only one of us Mason would still speak to. Their conversations were private, and Camden shared little beyond assurances that Mason was physically okay. When I pressed for details, Camden would grow evasive. "He's just trying to figure things out, Dad. Give him time." But time was making things worse, not better. 2 weeks after Mason left, Camden relayed a message that cut deeper than anything that came before. Mason says. Camden hesitated during our weekly call, clearly uncomfortable. He says he doesn't want to be contacted by you or Mom anymore. He says. Another pause. He says Thomas is his father now. That's how he's introducing him to people at his new school. The phone nearly slipped from my hand. That's absurd, I managed to say, though my voice sounded distant to my own ears. Thomas isn't his father. I'm his father. I know, Dad, Camden said gently. But that's what he said. I hung up and walked straight to the liquor cabinet, pouring 3 fingers of scotch with a shaking hand. The amber liquid caught the afternoon light as I raised it to my lips. My son, my flesh and blood, was calling another man Dad. The thought made something primal and possessive rise in me, something dark and angry. The next day, I made a decision. I would go to Thomas's house again, and this time, I wouldn't leave without speaking to my son. I didn't tell Sarah or my father my plans. Something told me this needed to be between Mason and me. The drive to Danbury was a blur of highway exits and talk radio that I couldn't focus on. Thomas lived in a modest craftsman-style home on a quiet street lined with maple trees just beginning to turn. The contrast to our Westfield neighborhood was stark. No gated entrances, no landscaping crews, just simple homes with bicycles in driveways and Halloween decorations already appearing on porches, though it was only early October. I parked across the street, rehearsing what I would say. I'd apologize first. I'd be calm. Reasonable. I'd remind Mason that family disagreements were normal but running away wasn't the solution. I'd promise to listen better, to consider his perspective on college. I'd bring him home where he belonged. As I approached the house, I noticed a basketball hoop above the garage and a helmet hanging from the handlebars of a bike leaning against the porch. Signs of a teenager. Signs of my son making himself at home in someone else's life. I rang the doorbell, straightening my tie and running a hand through my hair as I waited. The door opened, and there stood Thomas. My younger brother looked both exactly the same and completely different from how I remembered him. Same dark hair with hints of early gray at the temples, same lean build, but there was an ease to him I didn't recall, a confidence that had nothing to do with status or achievement. "Robert," he said, neither surprised nor particularly welcoming. "I wondered when you'd show up again." "I want to see my son," I said, skipping any pretense of pleasantries. Thomas regarded me silently for a long moment. "Mason isn't here right now. He's at baseball practice." Baseball? Another surprise. Mason had quit the team at his old school last year, claiming he'd lost interest. I'd been disappointed but hadn't pushed it, focusing instead on his academic performance. "Then I'll wait," I said, taking a step forward. Thomas didn't move from the doorway. "That's not a good idea. He's not ready to see you." "Not ready?" I felt my carefully rehearsed calm beginning to fray. "He's my son, Thomas. You have no right to keep him from me." "This isn't about rights," Thomas replied evenly. "This is about what Mason needs right now. And what he needs is space from you and Sarah." I scoffed. "What would you know about what my son needs? You've seen him 5 times in his life before this?" Something flickered across Thomas's face, something like pity mixed with anger. "That's what you think, isn't it?" He shook his head slowly. "Gosh, Robert. You really have no idea." "No idea about what?" Thomas stepped onto the porch, pulling the door closed behind him. "Mason and I have been in contact for years. Email at first, then calls, texts. We see each other every few months. Have been since he was 13. I stared at him, uncomprehending. "That's not possible. I would have known." "Would you?" Thomas asked, his tone gentler now. "When was the last time you checked who Mason was texting, or where he was going on those weekend study sessions? When was the last time you asked him about anything that wasn't grades or extracurriculars or college applications?" The accusation stung because there was truth in it. I had trusted Mason. He'd never given me reason not to. He'd always been the quiet one, the responsible one who didn't need constant supervision like some teenagers. "Why?" I demanded. "Why would he hide this from me?" Thomas sighed, leaning against the porch railing. "Because he knew you wouldn't approve. Because you made it clear how you felt about me and my choices." "This isn't about you and me," I snapped. "This is about my son running away instead of facing his responsibilities." "His responsibilities," Thomas repeated, almost to himself. "That's interesting phrasing." I felt my patience evaporating. I didn't come here to be psychoanalyzed by my little brother, the public school teacher. I came to take my son home. Thomas straightened, something hardening in his expression. "Mason isn't property, Robert. He's a person. A bright, thoughtful, creative person who's been drowning under the weight of your expectations for years. My expectations? You mean wanting him to succeed? To have opportunities? To live up to his potential? My voice rose despite my earlier promise to myself to stay calm. That's what fathers do. No, Thomas said quietly. Fathers see their children for who they are, not who they want them to be. I laughed bitterly. Rich, coming from someone who isn't a father. The words were meant to wound, but Thomas didn't flinch. I may not have children of my own, but I've spent the last 15 years teaching high school students. I've seen what happens when kids like Mason spend their lives trying to become someone they're not just to please their parents. A car door slammed somewhere down the street, making both of us turn. It wasn't Mason, just a neighbor unloading groceries. When I looked back at Thomas, his expression had changed. He seemed to be wrestling with a decision. There's something you should know, he said finally. Something Mason doesn't want me to tell you, but I think you need to hear it. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the October breeze. What? Last year, after winter break, Mason called me in the middle of the night. He was sitting in his car in an empty parking lot. He told me, Thomas paused, visibly collecting himself. He told me he'd been thinking about driving his car into a tree. The world seemed to tilt beneath my feet. That's not. Mason wouldn't. He had it all planned out, Thomas continued, his voice tight with controlled emotion. A specific curve on Winding Way Road where there wouldn't be other cars at that hour. He'd make it look like an accident so you and Sarah wouldn't blame yourselves. I felt physically ill. Why? Why would he even think about something like that? Because he was drowning, Robert. Every test, every application, every comparison to Camden. He felt like he could never measure up. That no matter what he did, it would never be enough for you. I shook my head in violent denial. No. Mason knows we love him. He knows. Does he? Thomas cut in. When was the last time you told him that without attaching a condition? Without following it with but you need to try harder or but your brother managed to? The question hit me like a physical blow because I couldn't immediately answer it. When had I last simply told Mason I loved him, full stop? That night, Thomas continued, I stayed on the phone with him for hours. I convinced him to drive to my place instead. He stayed the weekend. We talked, really talked. About his dreams, his fears. About the panic attacks he'd been having since sophomore year. About how he felt invisible in your house unless he was doing something wrong. Panic attacks? My son had been having panic attacks, and I hadn't known? How was that possible? You're lying, I said, but the accusation sounded hollow even to my own ears. Mason would have told us if he felt that way. Sarah would have noticed. Thomas raised an eyebrow. Would she? The same Sarah who called your son's pain dramatic? The same Sarah who told him we all feel he's a failure? I had no answer for that. The memory of Sarah's words that night, finally, someone's being honest about how we all feel, played again in my head, and with distance, they sounded even crueler than they had in the moment. Mason made me promise not to tell you about that night, Thomas said. He was embarrassed. Ashamed. He didn't want you to see it as another failure. So we made a deal instead, he would talk to me regularly, and he would see a therapist. A therapist? This revelation seemed almost as shocking as the rest. Mason's been seeing a therapist? Thomas nodded. For 8 months now. And he's been doing better. Finding his own path. That's why he finally stood up to you about Princeton, because Dr. Rivera helped him see that he deserves to make his own choices. I sank down onto the porch steps, my legs suddenly unable to support me. A therapist. Panic attacks. Suicidal thoughts. My son had been silently drowning while living under my roof, and I hadn't seen it. Hadn't wanted to see it. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, my voice barely audible. After that night, why didn't you call me? Thomas sat beside me, leaving a careful distance between us. Because Mason begged me not to. Because he was terrified of disappointing you even more than he already thought he had. And because. He hesitated. Because I wasn't sure you would hear it, Robert. Not really. I wanted to be angry at the accusation, but the truth of the past few weeks made that impossible. Even after Mason had left, even after he'd reached out to Thomas instead of me, I'd been more focused on getting him back home than understanding why he'd left. I thought I was pushing him to be his best, I said, more to myself than to Thomas. I thought I was doing what Dad did for us. Thomas made a sound that might have been a laugh if it held any humor. And how did that work out? Look at us, Robert. When was the last time we really talked before today? 20 years? Did Dad's pushing make us closer as brothers, as a family? I thought about my relationship with my father, the constant need for approval, the lingering sense that I was always one disappointment away from losing his respect. I thought about Thomas walking away from the family business, from the Caldwell legacy, and how I judged him for it without ever asking why. Mason's not like Camden, Thomas said quietly. He never has been. Camden thrives under pressure. Mason crumbles. Camden wants the path you and Dad walked. Mason needs to find his own. And State University is his path? I couldn't keep the skepticism from my voice entirely, though I tried. Maybe. Maybe not. But it's a start, his choice, not yours. Thomas looked at me directly. The irony is, Mason has so much potential. His writing is incredible. His history teacher last year told him he had the most original analysis she'd seen in 15 years of teaching. But because those weren't the metrics you valued, he learned to dismiss them too. I thought of the bookshelves in Mason's room, always filled with history and literature alongside the SAT prep materials I'd provided. I'd seen it as a distraction. Had it actually been a passion I'd been too blind to recognize? Does he hate me? The question escaped before I could stop it, small and vulnerable in a way I rarely allowed myself to be. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. No, he finally said. But he's afraid of you. Of your disapproval. Of never being good enough. And right now, he's angry. Really angry. I want to make this right, I said, and meant it. I need to talk to him. It's not that simple, Robert. You can't just apologize and expect everything to go back to normal. Trust takes time to rebuild. Then what am I supposed to do? Just let my son live with my brother indefinitely? Pretend I don't exist? Thomas sighed. For now? Yes. Give him space. Respect his boundaries. And maybe. He seemed to choose his next words carefully. Maybe consider talking to someone yourself. A therapist? I balked at the suggestion. I'm not the one with the problem here. Aren't you? Thomas asked mildly. Your 17-year-old son was suicidal under your roof and you didn't notice. Your wife dismissed his pain as dramatics. Your father sees children as extensions of his legacy rather than individuals. Those sound like problems to me. I wanted to argue, to defend myself and Sarah and our father. But the weight of everything Thomas had revealed was crushing that impulse beneath something much stronger, fear. Fear that I'd nearly lost my son in a way far more permanent than him moving to Connecticut. Fear that I still might. When will Mason be back from practice? I asked instead. Around 6. But like I said, I don't think seeing you today is a good idea. I checked my watch. Almost 5. I'm not leaving without at least trying to talk to him. Thomas studied me for a long moment. If I let you stay, you need to promise me something. You'll respect Mason's boundaries. If he doesn't want to talk, you leave. If he asks you to go, you go. No demands, no guilt trips, no financial threats. It went against every instinct I had as a father, as a Caldwell, to cede control this way. But I nodded. I promise. Wait in your car, Thomas said, standing. I'll text him that you're here. Give him the choice. I did as instructed, sitting in my Audi across the street, watching the minutes tick by with excruciating slowness. At 5:47, a beat-up Honda pulled into Thomas's driveway. Mason stepped out, still in his baseball uniform, a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. Thomas came out onto the porch and said something to him, gesturing toward my car. I saw the moment Mason spotted me. His entire body tensed, and even from this distance, I could see the conflict on his face. For a terrible moment, I thought he would simply go inside without acknowledging me at all. But after a long conversation with Thomas that I couldn't hear, Mason nodded reluctantly and started walking toward my car. I got out to meet him, my heart hammering against my ribs. Up close, I could see subtle changes in him already. His hair was longer. There was dirt on his uniform from sliding into bases. His shoulders were set in a way that made him look older, more assured. Hi, Dad, he said flatly, stopping several feet away from me. Mason. My throat felt tight. All my rehearsed speeches vanished in the face of my son's guarded expression. You look good. Baseball, huh? He nodded stiffly. Thomas coached for years before he started teaching. He's been helping me get back into it. The easy way he said Thomas's name, not Uncle Thomas but simply Thomas, drove home how much had changed in just a few weeks.
Mason, I started, then faltered.
What could I possibly say that would be enough? I'm sorry. For what I said that night. For a lot of things. He studied me, his expression unreadable. Okay. Just okay. Not acceptance, not forgiveness. Just acknowledgement. Your uncle told me. I swallowed hard. He told me about last winter. About the night you called him. Mason's face went pale, then flushed with anger. He shot a betrayed look toward the house, where Thomas stood watching from the porch. He had no right to tell you that. I think he did, I said quietly. I think I needed to know. Why? So you can feel guilty now? Use it to try to make me come home? His voice was bitter, hurt. It doesn't change anything. It changes everything, I countered. Mason, if I had known. You shouldn't have needed to know I was suicidal to treat me with basic respect, he cut in, the words like a slap. You shouldn't have needed that to see me. He was right, and the truth of it was devastating. No, I shouldn't have, I agreed, my voice rough with emotion. I should have seen how much pressure you were under. I should have noticed you were struggling. Mason looked away, his jaw tight. Camden noticed. He tried to tell you and Mom, but you wouldn't listen. Another revelation that shouldn't have been surprising but somehow was. Camden, who'd been asking careful questions about Mason's stress levels for months. Camden, who'd suggested more than once that perhaps we were pushing his brother too hard. Camden, whom I dismissed as being too soft on his younger brother. Your brother is wiser than I gave him credit for, I admitted. Wiser than me, certainly. Mason said nothing to this, just scuffed at the asphalt with his cleats. I'm not here to make you come home, I said after a moment. I'm here because I need you to know that I was wrong. What I said to you that night, it wasn't true. None of it. You're not a failure. You've never been a failure. Mason's eyes, when they met mine, were bright with unshed tears. Then why did you say it? Why did Mom say what she said? Why does Grandpa always look at me like I'm some kind of disappointment? Each question was a knife, and I had no shield against them. I don't know, I answered honestly. I think we got so caught up in what we wanted for you that we stopped seeing what you wanted for yourself. And that was wrong. He was silent for a long time, processing this. A breeze rustled the maple trees lining the street, sending a few early leaves spiraling to the ground between us. I'm not coming back, he finally said. Not right now. I nodded, having expected this answer even as I'd hoped for a different one. I understand. But I'd like to try to fix this, Mason. Whatever it takes. Therapy, like your uncle suggested. Space, if that's what you need. But I don't want to lose you. I'm not the one who walked away, Mason said quietly. You and Mom and Grandpa did that when you made it clear I wasn't the son you wanted. The accusation hurt all the more for its accuracy. You're right. And I'm sorry. Truly sorry. Mason looked back toward the house, toward Thomas waiting patiently on the porch. I need to go shower before dinner. It was a dismissal, gentle but firm. I wanted to argue, to ask for more time, but I remembered my promise to Thomas. Can I call you? I asked instead. Or text? Just to check in? Mason hesitated, then gave a small nod. Texts are better. I'm not really ready to talk much yet. It wasn't much, but it was something. A tiny opening where before there had been only a wall. I love you, Mason, I said, the words coming out raw and unpolished. Not because of what you achieve or where you go to college or whether you live up to some family legacy. I love you because you're my son. I'm sorry I ever made you doubt that. For just a second, I saw his composure crack, a flicker of the child he'd been not so long ago, the boy who'd once looked at me like I hung the moon. But it vanished quickly behind the protective shell of the young man he was becoming. I have to go, he repeated, already turning away. I watched him walk back to the house, exchange a few words with Thomas, and disappear inside. Only then did Thomas approach me, his expression cautiously optimistic. That went better than I expected, he said. He's still not coming home. No. Not yet. Thomas shoved his hands into his pockets. But he talked to you. That's progress. I nodded, feeling simultaneously drained and somehow lighter than I had in weeks. I didn't know, Thomas. About any of it. The panic attacks, the therapist. The night he called you. I know you didn't, Thomas said. That's part of the problem. I looked at my brother, really looked at him for perhaps the first time in decades. There was a steadiness to him, a certainty I'd always interpreted as stubbornness but now recognized as something else. Integrity, maybe. Thank you, I said. For being there for him when I wasn't. Thomas seemed surprised by this. He's family. Yes. He is. I hesitated, then asked the question that had been lingering since I'd arrived. Is he really introducing you as his father? Thomas had the grace to look uncomfortable. No. That was. Camden may have exaggerated to get your attention. Mason still calls me Uncle Thomas, though he's dropped the uncle part with some of his new friends. Relief washed through me, though it was tempered by the realization that Camden had felt it necessary to lie to shake me out of my complacency. He's a good kid, Robert, Thomas said. One of the best I've ever known. Smart, thoughtful, surprisingly funny once you get past that quiet exterior. He deserves to be seen for who he is, not who anyone else wants him to be. I'm starting to understand that, I admitted. Too late, maybe. But I'm trying. Thomas regarded me with an expression I couldn't quite read. It's never too late to be a better father. A better person. I nodded, knowing he was right but unsure where to even begin. Will you keep me updated? Let me know how he's doing? I will. And I'll encourage him to respond to your texts. Small steps. As I drove home that evening, the conversation with Mason and Thomas replayed in my mind like a film I couldn't stop watching. The revelation about Mason's near suicide haunted me, the image of my son alone in a car, planning his death because he couldn't bear the weight of our expectations. How close had I come to losing him forever without ever knowing why? Sarah was waiting when I arrived home, her expression a mix of worry and irritation. "Where have you been?" "I've been calling for hours." I set my keys down slowly. "I went to see Mason." Her eyes widened. "At Thomas's? Is he coming home?" "No," I said, moving past her toward the stairs. "And I didn't ask him to." She followed me, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood. "What do you mean you didn't ask him to?" "Robert, this has gone on long enough. If you couldn't convince him, we'll get the lawyer too." "There will be no lawyers," I cut her off, turning to face her. "Mason is staying with Thomas for now. And we're going to respect that decision." Sarah stared at me as if I'd started speaking in tongues. "Have you lost your mind? He's 17. He belongs at home, with us." "Does he?" I asked quietly. Because from what I learned today, home hasn't felt safe for Mason in a very long time. Something flickered across Sarah's face, a hint of guilt quickly masked by indignation. "What are you talking about? We've given him everything. A beautiful home, the best schools, every opportunity. Did you know he's been having panic attacks since sophomore year?" I interrupted. "Did you know he's been seeing a therapist for the past 8 months?" She blinked, momentarily derailed. "That's absurd. Mason would have told us." "Would he? After you called his feelings dramatic? After you said finally, someone's being honest about how we all feel when I called our son a failure?" Color drained from Sarah's face, then returned in angry splotches across her cheekbones. "You're taking his side now? After he ran away instead of facing his responsibilities like an adult?" "He's 17, Sarah," I said wearily. "He is not an adult. And the responsibility was ours to see him, to hear him. We failed at that. I failed at that." Sarah opened her mouth as if to argue further, then abruptly closed it. She turned and walked stiffly to our bedroom, closing the door with deliberate control. I didn't follow her. Instead, I found myself climbing the stairs to the 3rd floor, to Mason's bedroom. It had remained untouched since he left, preserved like a museum exhibit of a life interrupted. The room was neater than most teenagers, another sign of Mason's need to meet expectations. Trophies from debate team and Model UN lined one shelf, though I now wondered if he'd pursued those activities for himself or for us. His desk was organized, textbooks stacked precisely, a Princeton pennant hanging above them, a pennant I'd brought home from a weekend visit to Camden. What hadn't I seen before? What clues to my son's inner life had been here all along? I moved to his bookshelf, examining titles I'd barely registered before. History books beyond his school curriculum. Dog-eared paperbacks by Steinbeck and Hemingway and authors I didn't recognize. A well-worn journal tucked between them, its leather cover cracked with use. I shouldn't look, I thought, even as my fingers reached for it. This was Mason's private space, his private thoughts. But hadn't that been part of the problem? That I'd respected his privacy so completely I'd failed to notice his pain? That I'd never looked beyond the surface of his achievements to see the person beneath? I opened the journal, turning pages filled with Mason's neat handwriting. Most entries were brief, observations about school, complaints about assignments, occasional mentions of friends. But as I moved through the months, a darker theme emerged. Dad brought home another Princeton sweatshirt for me today. Asked when I was going to start studying for the alumni interview. I couldn't tell him I've been having nightmares about it for weeks. Another perfect score for Camden. Another dinner celebrating his success. Sometimes I think I could disappear and no one would notice as long as my grades stayed decent. Grandpa cornered me after dinner to discuss my future. Told me the Caldwell name opens doors but only if I don't embarrass it. Sometimes I wish I had a different last name. Or no name at all. Had another attack during chem exam. Couldn't breathe. Asked to go to the bathroom and sat on the floor for 10 minutes trying not to pass out. Still finished the test. Still got an A. No one noticed anything was wrong. Called Uncle Thomas again. He's the only one who actually listens. The only one who doesn't make me feel like everything I am is wrong somehow. The entries continued, page after page of quiet desperation written in the careful hand of a child trying his best not to disappoint the adults around him. A child I had failed to protect even from myself. I closed the journal and replaced it exactly where I'd found it, overcome with shame so profound it felt physical. How had I missed all of this? How had I been so blind to my own son? My phone buzzed with a text message. Camden. Dad, is it true you went to see Mason? How did it go? I stared at the message, unsure how to respond. How did one summarize the collapse of everything you thought you knew about your family, your parenting, yourself? Yes, I saw him. He's staying with Thomas for now. I think it's the right thing for him. Camden's response was immediate, surprised. Really? You're okay with that? No. But I'm trying to be. It's what Mason needs right now. There was a long pause before Camden's next message appeared. Thank you. For listening to him finally. The simple gratitude in those words made my throat tight. I should have listened sooner. To both of you. It's not too late, Dad. I hoped he was right. Standing in Mason's empty room, surrounded by the evidence of a child I'd failed to truly see, I wasn't sure. But for the first time since Mason had walked out 3 weeks ago, I felt something beyond anger and wounded pride. Something like hope. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was Mason. I'm joining the school newspaper here. They need a history columnist. Just that. No greeting, no context. But it was something, a tiny bridge across the chasm between us. A piece of himself he was choosing to share. That's great, I replied. You've always been an excellent writer. Had I ever told him that before? I couldn't remember. I'd commented on his grades, his test scores, his college prospects. But had I ever simply acknowledged his talents without connecting them to achievement? There was no immediate response from Mason, but I hadn't expected one. Small steps, Thomas had said. This was the first of many. I took one last look around the room that now felt like a monument to my failures as a father. Then I closed the door gently behind me and went downstairs to call a therapist. 6 months later, on a bright April afternoon, I sat in the bleachers of Danbury High's baseball field, watching Mason pitch the final inning of a close game. Sarah sat beside me, her posture still slightly stiff but her expression genuinely interested as our son struck out the final batter. He's good, she said, sounding surprised despite having attended several games now. I never realized he had such a talent for this. We never gave him the chance to show us, I replied, the admission coming easier now after months of therapy, both individual sessions and the family sessions Mason had cautiously agreed to participate in via video call. Sarah nodded, a flicker of the old defensiveness crossing her face before subsiding. Her journey toward acknowledging our mistakes had been more halting than mine, more reluctant. But Dr. Winters, the family therapist Thomas had recommended, was patient and persistent. And the stark choice between changing and losing her son forever had eventually proven persuasive. Dad. Sarah. Mason jogged up to the bleachers after the team celebration, still in his uniform, his face flushed with victory and exertion. He'd stopped calling Sarah Mom for now, another boundary Dr. Winters had helped us understand and respect. Did you see that last strikeout? Wouldn't have missed it, I said, smiling at his enthusiasm. Congratulations. Thanks. He glanced at his watch. I've got about an hour before I need to head to the newspaper meeting. Do you want to grab a quick lunch? The casual invitation, something that would have been unremarkable before, now felt like a gift. We'd love to. As we walked to the local diner Mason had introduced us to during previous visits, he filled us in on his latest college updates. He'd been accepted to State University with a partial scholarship, but also to Wesleyan and Haverford, smaller liberal arts colleges with strong history departments that Thomas had encouraged him to consider. I'm leaning toward Haverford, he said as we slid into a booth. Their history program is amazing, and they have this writing fellowship I want to apply for. 6 months ago, I might have pushed Princeton again, might have dismissed a writing fellowship as impractical. Now, I nodded encouragingly. That sounds perfect for you. Mason gave me a quick, searching look, still not entirely used to this new version of his father who listened more and dictated less. Yeah, I think it might be. Have you told Camden? Sarah asked, scanning the menu with the slight bewilderment she still displayed in casual dining establishments. He mentioned you two were discussing schools last weekend. Mason nodded. He actually thinks Haverford would be a good fit too. Said the smaller classes would probably be better for me than a big university. The easy way he mentioned his brother made me smile. If anything, their relationship had grown stronger through all of this. Camden had become Mason's strongest advocate, a bridge between the fractures in our family. Thomas is coming to Sunday dinner this weekend, I said as our food arrived. He mentioned you're both planning to visit Haverford's campus next week. Yeah, during my spring break, Mason confirmed, then hesitated. Would you want to come too? Not the whole time, but maybe for the official tour? Sarah and I exchanged surprised glances. It was the first time Mason had invited us into his college process since that disastrous night in October. We'd be honored, I said carefully, not wanting to overwhelm him with too much enthusiasm. If you're sure that's what you want. Mason shrugged, aiming for casual, though I could see the significance wasn't lost on him either. It makes sense for you to see it too. Since you'll be helping pay for it and all. The reference to money, something that had been a contentious subject during the early weeks of our estrangement, was deliberate. Another small olive branch. Of course, Sarah said, making an effort to sound normal rather than pathetically grateful. Just let us know the details. As Mason ate his burger, chatting about the upcoming school newspaper edition he was editing, I found myself studying him with the focused attention I'd failed to give him for so many years. He looked different now, more confident, more comfortable in his own skin. His smiles came more easily. The shadow that had always seemed to hover behind his eyes had lightened. Living with Thomas had been good for him. My brother had given Mason something I hadn't known how to provide: acceptance without condition, support without pressure. In the process, Thomas had begun healing his relationship with me as well, decades of distance slowly closing as we found common ground in our concern for Mason. My father had been less adaptable. When he'd realized I wasn't going to force Mason to return, that I was instead working with Thomas and a therapist to rebuild trust with my son on his terms, he'd been furious. Coddling the boy won't prepare him for the real world, he declared. The real world nearly lost him because we didn't coddle him enough, I'd responded, standing my ground in a way I rarely had before. The revelation of Mason's suicidal ideation had shocked my father, but not enough to fundamentally change his perspective. He was a man of his generation, and some lessons came harder than others. But even he had begun to thaw slightly in recent months, especially after Mason's college acceptances proved that his grandson wasn't throwing away his future by charting his own course. He'd even attended one baseball game, sitting stiffly beside Thomas in what had to be one of the more surreal family outings in Caldwell history. "Earth to Dad," Mason's voice broke into my thoughts. "You're staring." "Sorry," I said, slightly embarrassed. "Just thinking about how much has changed since last fall." Mason nodded, his expression turning thoughtful. "Yeah. A lot. For the better, I hope?" The question came out more vulnerable than I'd intended. Mason considered this seriously, pushing a French fry around in ketchup. "Yeah. I think so. I mean, it's been hard. Really hard sometimes." He looked up, meeting my eyes directly. "But I feel like I can breathe now. Like I'm living my life instead of the one you and Grandpa had planned for me." The honesty was still uncomfortable sometimes, but I'd learned to lean into the discomfort rather than avoid it. "I'm sorry we made you feel trapped. That was never our intention." "I know," Mason said simply. A comfortable silence fell as we finished our meal. When the check came, Mason reached for his wallet, but I shook my head. "My treat," I said, sliding my credit card to the waitress. Mason smiled, that genuine smile that had once been so rare. "Thanks, Dad." As we walked back toward the school, Mason slightly ahead as he texted his newspaper editor about their upcoming meeting, Sarah slipped her hand into mine. "He's happy," she said quietly, a touch of wonder in her voice. "Actually happy." I squeezed her hand, watching our son, the son I'd nearly lost through my own blindness, the son I was slowly learning to truly see. "Yes. He is." It wasn't a perfect resolution. There were still difficult days, still moments when old patterns threatened to resurface. Mason still lived with Thomas, though he'd begun spending occasional weekends at home. The trust that had been broken was rebuilding slowly, carefully, one conversation and one baseball game at a time. But watching him now, walking ahead of us in the spring sunshine, his step light and his shoulders unburdened, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a long time: pride. Not in his achievements or his potential or his reflection on the family name, but simply in who he was. My son. Exactly as he was meant to be. Story 3.
At dinner, Dad shouted, "Either give your fiancé to your sister or pack your things and leave this house." Mom added, "Your sister deserves him more than you ever will." Sister smirked, "Finally someone's being honest about who he actually wants." I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I ran away with him that same night and clicked one button on the bank app. By 9 a.m., I had 57 missed calls and a text from my mother, "Keep your fiancé but please stop this." The silence after my father's words stretched like a broken wire. Marcus shifted beside me, his fork suspended halfway to his mouth, green beans dangling. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked louder than my heartbeat. My mother's manicured fingers drummed against her wine glass, the good crystal, the one she only brought out when she wanted to impress someone. Or humiliate them. "Excuse me?" I finally managed, though my voice came out smaller than I'd intended. Dad's face had turned that particular shade of red he got when his business deals went south. "You heard me, Emma. Your sister has feelings for Marcus, and frankly, it makes more sense. She's always been the responsible one. The successful one. 26 years of being their daughter, and this was how they saw me. The disposable one." Chloe leaned back in her chair, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. She'd been working toward this moment for months, little comments about how Marcus looked tired, how I seemed to stress him out, how she'd noticed him glancing her way during family gatherings. I'd dismissed it as sibling rivalry, the same dynamic we'd had since childhood where she collected my things like trophies. But my fiancé was not a borrowed sweater. "This is insane," Marcus said, setting down his fork with a clink that echoed through the dining room. "I'm engaged to Emma. I love Emma." Mom laughed, actually laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Oh, sweetie. Love fades. Compatibility lasts. Chloe has a law degree from Harvard. She's making 6 figures at 24. Emma works at a nonprofit that barely pays rent. The roast beef on my plate had gone cold, congealing in its own juices. I stared at it rather than look at their faces. 3 weeks ago, I'd been planning our wedding, comparing cake flavors and arguing with the florist about peonies versus roses. 3 weeks ago, I thought I knew who my family was. Emma's work matters, Marcus said, his voice gaining strength. She's helping kids who what? Dad interrupted. Who'll never amount to anything anyway. Marcus, you're a surgeon. You need a wife who can match your social standing, who can host dinner parties and navigate medical conferences. Not someone who comes home covered in finger paint and glue. I taught art therapy to children who'd been through trauma. Last month, a 7-year-old girl named Lily had drawn her first picture without monsters in it. She'd given it to me with sticky fingers and said it was the happiest thing she'd ever made. But sitting at this table, surrounded by my family's cold assessment of my worth, that moment felt as distant as childhood itself. Besides, Chloe added, her voice dripping with false sweetness, we've gotten so close lately. Marcus and I have so much in common. We both appreciate fine dining, classical music, intellectual conversation. The implication hung in the air like smoke, unlike you. Marcus stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood. This is completely out of line. Emma and I are leaving. Sit down, Dad commanded, using the voice that had terrified me as a child. We're not finished. But Marcus didn't sit. He reached for my hand, and I felt something shift, not just in the room, but in me. For the first time all evening, I looked directly at my father. Actually, we are finished, I said, standing to. All of us. Mom's composure cracked slightly. Emma, don't be dramatic. We're trying to help you see reason. Reason? The word tasted bitter. You want me to hand over my fiancé like a party favor because you think my little sister deserves him more? It's not about deserving, Dad said, though his tone suggested otherwise. It's about what makes sense. Chloe's established. She owns property. She has investments. What do you have? I thought about my small apartment with its plants on every windowsill, the art supplies scattered across my kitchen table, the thank you drawings from my students covering my refrigerator. What did I have? I had a life I'd built with my own hands, work that mattered, and a man who loved me for who I was, not who my family thought I should become. I have everything I need, I said. Chloe rolled her eyes. Including a fiancé who's settling for you because he's too polite to admit he wants someone better? That was when Marcus truly surprised me. Instead of defending me with words, he kissed me. Right there, in front of everyone, soft and sure and completely deliberate. When he pulled away, he looked straight at my sister. I've never wanted anyone but Emma, he said. Not for 1 second. The victory on Chloe's face faltered. Dad slammed his hand on the table, making the china jump. Fine. If that's how you want to play this, Emma, then you can pack your things and get out. Tonight. Dad, I started. I'm serious. You want to choose him over your own family? Over people who've known you your whole life? Then you can see how well that works out for you. Mom nodded, her expression cold as January. Maybe when you're struggling to pay rent on a teacher's salary while Chloe's living in her penthouse, you'll understand what we were trying to save you from. The strangest thing was how calm I felt. Like I was watching this happen to someone else, floating above the dinner table and observing this family implode with clinical detachment. Maybe it was shock. Maybe it was finally seeing them clearly for the first time. Okay, I said simply. That one word seemed to deflate their righteous anger. They'd expected tears, begging, maybe even me actually considering their proposal. But I was done crying over people who'd never really seen me at all. Marcus and I walked out without another word. In the hallway, I grabbed my purse and the small overnight bag I'd brought for what was supposed to be a pleasant family dinner. Behind us, I could hear Chloe's voice rising in frustration, though I couldn't make out the words. The cold October air hit my face like freedom. Your place or mine? Marcus asked as we reached his car. Yours, I said. I need to think. During the 20-minute drive to his apartment, I turned my phone to silent and watched the city lights blur past the window. My chest felt hollow, like someone had scooped out my heart and left behind an echo chamber. But underneath the hurt was something else, something that felt almost like relief. Marcus's apartment was a sanctuary of warm lighting and soft furniture, the kind of place where you could actually breathe. He made tea without asking if I wanted any, the familiar ritual of kettle and mugs and steam rising between us. I'm sorry, he said finally, settling beside me on the couch. I'm so sorry they put you through that. Are you? I asked, studying his face. Sorry, I mean. Or are you wondering if they had a point? He set down his mug hard enough to slosh tea onto the coffee table. Emma, how can you even ask that? Because my sister is beautiful and brilliant and successful, and according to my parents, I'm the family disappointment who teaches finger painting to broken kids. First of all, art therapy isn't finger painting, and those kids aren't broken. Second, your sister is ambitious and cold and has spent the last 6 months trying to convince me you're not good enough for me. And third, he took my hands, his surgeon's fingers gentle and sure. I fell in love with your kindness, your creativity, the way you see beauty in things other people overlook. I fell in love with you, not some checklist of accomplishments. I believed him. That was the strange part, sitting there in the wreckage of my family relationships, I believed every word he said. But that didn't make the hurt less sharp. What if they're right about the practical stuff? I asked. What if I can't give you the kind of life you deserve? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, considering this seriously instead of brushing it off with empty reassurances. When I was in medical school, he said finally, I dated someone like your sister. Beautiful, ambitious, perfect on paper. She had a 5-year plan and a 10-year plan and knew exactly which medical conferences would advance my career. She organized dinner parties where every conversation was a networking opportunity. What happened? I was miserable. Successful, but miserable. Every day felt like performing a role I didn't particularly like. Then I met you at that art gallery opening, remember? You were standing in front of that painting of the thunderstorm, and you said it looked like how anxiety feels on the inside. I remembered. It had been such a strange thing to say to a stranger, but he'd understood immediately. That's when I realized I'd been living someone else's definition of a good life, he continued. With you, everything feels real. Even the hard parts. We talked until nearly 3 a.m, working through the shock and hurt at Anchor. By the time we finally went to bed, I'd made a decision that surprised even me. But first, I had work to do. While Marcus slept, I crept into his home office and opened my laptop. The blue glow of the screen felt like possibility in the darkness. I pulled up my banking app, the one I hadn't looked at in months because the balance was always depressingly low. But there was something my family didn't know about me, something I'd kept private out of what I thought was modesty but now realized was a survival instinct. 2 years ago, my great-aunt Catherine had died and left me a trust fund. Not a huge one by my family's standards, but substantial enough to matter. She'd stipulated that I couldn't access it until I was 25, and even then, only if I was financially independent, living according to my own values, not those imposed by others. Aunt Catherine had been the black sheep of the family, an artist who'd never married, and had lived in a tiny apartment filled with paintings and cats. My parents had always spoken of her with a mixture of pity and disdain. But she'd been the only adult who'd ever really listened to me, who'd encouraged my art and my dreams of working with children. The trust fund had matured 3 months ago. I'd been meaning to figure out what to do with it, but life had gotten busy with wedding planning and work. Now, staring at the balance on my screen, I saw exactly what Aunt Catherine had intended. She'd given me freedom. The number was bigger than I'd expected, investments had performed well, apparently. Enough to pay off my student loans, buy a house, maybe even start the art therapy center I'd been dreaming about for years. But first, I had a more immediate use for it. You see, there was something else my family didn't know. 6 months ago, Dad had asked me to co-sign a business loan for his struggling construction company. I'd done it without question, the way I'd always done whatever my family asked. The way I'd been conditioned to be helpful, accommodating and grateful for their attention. What Dad hadn't mentioned was that he'd used my signature to guarantee several other loans as well. Loans that, according to the paperwork I was suddenly understanding for the first time, made me personally liable if his business failed. Which, according to the financial documents I'd found in his office during last month's family barbecue, it was about to do. I discovered the papers by accident while looking for a phone charger. Dad's desk drawer had been slightly open, and when I'd pushed it closed, a folder had fallen out. Being naturally tidy, I'd picked it up, and seen my name on document after document I'd never signed, never seen, never agreed to. I'd been too shocked to confront him then. Too confused and hurt to process what it meant. But sitting in Marcus's office at 3 a.m, the pieces finally clicked into place. My family hadn't suddenly decided I was worthless tonight. They'd been planning this for months. Get me to give up Marcus to Chloe, get me out of the house, and when Dad's business inevitably collapsed, I'd be the one left holding the debt. The disappointing daughter who'd finally proven she was good for something after all. But they'd made one crucial mistake: they'd assumed I was as financially helpless as they'd always told me I was. I opened a new browser window and navigated to my father's business banking portal. He'd given me the login information months ago, back when he'd wanted me to help with bookkeeping. Family business should stay in the family, he'd said. Another manipulation I was only now recognizing. His company had 3 major loans coming due next week. Loans that would bankrupt him if they weren't paid or renegotiated. Loans that my forged signature had guaranteed. But here's the thing about guarantees: they work both ways. I spent the next hour reading financial documents and making phone calls to automated banking systems. By 4 a.m., I transferred enough money from my trust fund to cover Dad's debts, directly to the lenders, with explicit instructions that the loans were to be marked as paid in full, with no further obligations to any guarantors. Then I did something that felt like poetic justice. I removed myself as guarantor on every single document I could access, using my legal right as someone who'd discovered fraudulent use of her signature. Dad would wake up to find his business debts mysteriously paid off, but also discover that he no longer had access to my financial backing for future ventures. He'd be free and clear, and completely cut off from the daughter he'd just thrown away. But I wasn't done. Chloe's success wasn't quite as legitimate as she'd led everyone to believe. During family gatherings, she'd often bragged about her investment portfolio, her real estate ventures, her lucrative side business. What she hadn't mentioned was that most of it was leveraged through a shell company she'd created using falsified information. I knew this because she drunkenly confessed it to me last Christmas, laughing about how easy it was to fool banks when you had the right credentials and a Harvard law degree. She'd made me promise not to tell anyone, and I kept that promise, until tonight. The Securities and Exchange Commission has a whistleblower portal that's remarkably easy to use. It took me less than 30 minutes to file a comprehensive report, complete with documentation I'd photographed during previous visits to Chloe's apartment. Photos I'd taken innocently, admiring her success, never knowing I was documenting fraud. By 5 a.m., I'd submitted everything to the appropriate authorities and sent anonymous tips to 3 financial journalists who specialized in white-collar crime. The truth about Chloe's empire would come out eventually, with or without my intervention. But this way, it would happen faster. Marcus found me at his kitchen table as the sun was rising, surrounded by papers and empty coffee mugs. "You're up early," he said, kissing the top of my head. "Couldn't sleep. I've been thinking about what happens next." "And?" I closed my laptop and looked up at him, this man who'd chosen me over the easy path, who'd walked away from my family's approval without hesitation. "I think we should elope," I said. His eyebrows shot up. "Really? Really? I'm tired of planning a wedding for people who don't actually want us to be happy. Let's just go somewhere beautiful and marry each other and start our life together." Marcus sat down across from me, his hair sticking up in directions that made him look younger than his 31 years. "What about your family?" he asked gently. "What about them? They made their choice last night. Now I'm making mine." My phone, which had been silent since we'd left dinner, suddenly buzzed with activity. Call after call, text after text, all from numbers I recognized. I glanced at the screen and felt nothing but tired satisfaction. "They're calling," I told Marcus, showing him the display. "Are you going to answer?" I thought about it seriously, watching my phone light up like a Christmas tree. Then I turned it off completely. "Not today," I said. "Maybe not for a while." We spent the morning planning our escape. Marcus had vacation time saved up, and I could take a leave of absence from work. My supervisor was understanding about family emergencies, and this certainly qualified. By noon, we'd booked flights to Costa Rica, found a small resort that specialized in intimate weddings, and started packing. It felt like playing hooky from our own lives, but in the best possible way. The first crack in my resolve came around 2 p.m., when I finally turned my phone back on to call work. 57 missed calls, 34 voicemails, and more text messages than I could count. The most recent one, from my mother, made my stomach twist. "Emma, please call us. Something terrible has happened. We need to talk about last night. We may have been too harsh. Please, sweetheart, just call us back." For a moment, I felt the old familiar tug of guilt and obligation. The conditioning of 26 years doesn't disappear overnight. But then I read the timestamp and realized what had happened. They discovered the financial changes. Dad had probably woken up to find his business loans mysteriously paid off and panicked, thinking he'd made some kind of mistake. Then he'd called his bank and learned about the guarantor changes. Meanwhile, Chloe had likely received a call from someone asking about her investment strategies, or maybe her bank had frozen suspicious accounts pending investigation. They weren't calling because they missed me or regretted their words. They were calling because they needed me, specifically, they needed access to whatever money they thought I had hidden away. "Everything okay?" Marcus asked, finding me staring at my phone in the bedroom. "They're scared," I said, showing him the messages. "Good." He read over a few of them, his expression growing darker with each text. "Your mother is claiming they were testing you last night," he said. "That they wanted to see how much you really loved me." "Classic," I said, folding a sundress into my suitcase. "When direct manipulation doesn't work, try gaslighting." "Are you sure you're okay with this? Cutting them off completely?" I paused, a pair of sandals in my hands, and really considered his question. Was I okay with it? 24 hours ago, these people had been my family. Flawed, difficult, but still the people who'd raised me, who'd been at every birthday and graduation and holiday. But they'd also been the people who'd systematically undermined my confidence, who'd used my signature without permission, who tried to give away my fiancé like an unwanted piece of furniture. "I think I've been grieving this family for years without realizing it," I said finally. Last night just made it official. Our flight left at 8 p.m. By 6 p.m., we were at the airport, and I felt lighter than I had in months. We'd left no forwarding address, told no one our destination, and arranged for a neighbor to check on Marcus's apartment while we were gone. As our plane lifted off from the runway, I watched the city lights shrink below us and felt something I hadn't experienced since childhood: complete freedom from other people's expectations. Costa Rica was everything we'd hoped for and nothing like the wedding we'd originally planned. Instead of a church full of relatives making polite conversation, we exchanged vows on a beach at sunset with only a local officiant and 2 witnesses we'd met at breakfast. Instead of a formal reception with assigned seating and speeches, we had dinner at a small restaurant where the owner brought us champagne and the cook came out to congratulate us personally. It was perfect in its imperfection, meaningful in its simplicity. We honeymooned for 2 weeks, hiking through cloud forests and learning to surf and talking about the future we wanted to build together. Marcus researched options for opening a private practice that would allow him to do more pro bono work with underserved communities. I sketched plans for the art therapy center I'd always dreamed of starting. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't trying to prove I was worthy of love or success. I was just living. The reckoning came when we returned home. My phone, which I kept off for most of the trip, exploded with notifications the moment I turned it back on. But the tone of the messages had shifted dramatically from desperation to anger to something that looked almost like resignation. "Dad, Emma, I don't know what you did, but you've made your point. Please call me so we can work this out. Mom, your sister is going through a very difficult time right now. I hope you're satisfied with yourself. Chloe, you vindictive witch. I know this was you." And then, buried among the accusations and pleas, one message that stopped me cold. Marcus's ex-girlfriend Sarah heard about the family drama. "If things don't work out with Emma, call me. Some of us appreciate successful men." I showed the message to Marcus, who looked genuinely puzzled. "I haven't talked to Sarah in over a year," he said. "How would she even know about any of this?" The answer came in the next message, sent just an hour later. "Chloe, hope you enjoyed your little vacation. Sarah's very interested in hearing about Emma's financial situation." Amazing how quickly news travels in small circles. The implication was clear: Chloe had reached out to Marcus's ex, probably hoping to cause problems between us. It was petty and desperate and exactly the kind of thing she'd always done when she didn't get her way. But instead of feeling hurt or insecure, I found myself laughing. "She really doesn't understand, does she?" I said to Marcus. "She still thinks this is about competition, about who deserves what." "What do you want to do about it?" he asked. I thought about it for a moment, then deleted all the messages without responding to any of them. "Nothing," I said. "Absolutely nothing." The beautiful thing about cutting toxic people out of your life is how quickly you realize how much energy you've been wasting on managing their emotions and reactions. Without the constant stress of walking on eggshells around my family, I felt like I could breathe deeper, think clearer, love more freely. Marcus and I started house hunting, looking for a place that felt like home rather than a status symbol. We found a charming craftsman bungalow with built-in bookshelves and a sunroom that would be perfect for art therapy sessions. It needed work, but it had good bones and a garden where we could grow vegetables and maybe get a dog someday. I used part of Aunt Catherine's trust fund to buy it outright, no mortgage, no debt, no strings attached. The rest went towards starting the nonprofit art therapy center I've been dreaming about for years. The center opened 6 months later, in a converted warehouse space that we'd renovated with bright colors and large windows and enough room for children to run and play and create. On opening day, Lily, the 7-year-old who'd drawn me that first happy picture, brought her grandmother to see the space. "This is where Emma works now," she announced proudly, showing off the art supplies and easels like she owned the place. Her grandmother, a tiny woman with kind eyes and calloused hands, squeezed my arm and said, "Thank you for seeing her." That moment, standing in my own space, surrounded by children's artwork and the sound of laughter, knowing that I'd built something meaningful with my own choices and resources, felt like vindication in a way that no amount of revenge ever could. I didn't hear from my family again until almost a year later. The call came on a Tuesday evening while Marcus and I were making dinner together. I almost didn't answer the unknown number, but something made me pick up. "Emma?" The voice was tentative, smaller than I remembered. "It's Mom." I set down my wooden spoon and walked into the living room, away from Marcus's concerned gaze. "Hi," I said simply. She paused, and I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. "I wanted to call and see how you're doing. I heard about your art center. It sounds wonderful." "It is," I said, not offering more. "Emma, I owe you an apology." "We all do." That night at dinner, we were completely out of line. I don't know what we were thinking. I did know what they'd been thinking. They'd been thinking I was weak enough to manipulate, desperate enough for their approval to sacrifice my own happiness. They'd been thinking they could use me one more time before discarding me entirely. But I didn't say that. Instead, I said, "Thank you for apologizing. Would you be willing to meet for coffee sometime? I'd like to try to rebuild our relationship." The old Emma would have said yes immediately, grateful for any crumb of affection, eager to forgive and forget and return to the familiar patterns of conditional love. But I wasn't the old Emma anymore. "I don't think so," I said gently. "I'm not angry anymore, but I'm not interested in going backward either." "What does that mean?" "It means I've built the life I love with people who love me as I am. I don't have room in it for people who only love me when I'm useful to them." The silence stretched between us, filled with everything we couldn't say. "What about Chloe?" Mom finally asked. "She's struggling, Emma. The investigation into her business practices. It's been very difficult for her." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and meant it. Not sorry enough to regret my actions, but sorry that anyone had to go through public humiliation and professional consequences. "She thinks you're the one who reported her." "I think Chloe has spent so much time cutting corners that she's forgotten some of us actually follow the rules." "So you're just going to abandon your family completely? After everything we've done for you?" And there it was, the manipulation that had controlled me for 26 years, dressed up as wounded love. "I haven't abandoned anyone," I said. "I've just stopped participating in relationships that require me to be someone I'm not." I hung up before she could respond. Marcus found me sitting on our front porch, watching the sunset paint our neighborhood in shades of gold and pink. "Your mom?" he asked, settling beside me on the swing we'd installed last month. "Yeah. She wanted to reconcile." "How do you feel about that?" I leaned against his shoulder, solid and warm and completely accepting of whatever I decided. "Free," I said. "I feel free." 2 years later, I received a wedding invitation in the mail. Chloe was marrying someone I'd never heard of, an investment banker from her lawyer days, apparently. The invitation was addressed to both Marcus and me, our names written in elegant calligraphy on expensive cardstock. I studied it for a long time, this formal acknowledgement of my existence after years of silence. Was it an olive branch? A way of testing whether I'd respond? Or just Chloe's way of showing off her successful rebound from the scandal that had cost her the Harvard law firm job? In the end, it didn't matter. I sent a polite decline with a modest wedding gift, a picture frame from the Art Therapy Center, made by one of my teenage students. Simple, honest, and completely free of hidden meaning. Marcus and I went hiking that weekend instead, exploring a new trail in the mountains outside the city. We packed a picnic lunch and spent the afternoon lying in a meadow, talking about maybe starting a family of our own someday. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd stayed?" he asked, his fingers threading through mine. "If I'd given you to Chloe, you mean?" I grinned at him. "Never. But I do wonder sometimes what would have happened if I'd handled things differently. If I tried to work it out with them instead of just walking away. Any regrets?" I thought about it seriously, watching clouds drift across the impossibly blue sky. Did I regret cutting ties with the people who'd raised me? Did I regret the financial retaliation that had forced them to face consequences for their actions? Did I regret choosing love over obligation? No, I said finally. I don't think I could have become who I am now if I'd stayed who I was then. Marcus squeezed my hand. Who are you now? Someone who knows the difference between being loved and being needed, I said. Someone who chooses her own family. I like her, he said, rolling over to kiss me. I like her a lot. As we packed up our picnic and headed back down the mountain, I thought about Aunt Catherine and the gift she'd given me, not just the money, but the permission to live according to my own values. She'd understood something that took me years to learn. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away from people who refuse to see your worth. My phone buzzed with a text from one of my students, a picture of a painting she'd completed at home. It was a self-portrait, but instead of the dark, angry scribbles she'd started with months ago, this girl had painted herself surrounded by flowers and sunshine. Look what I made. The text read. It's me being happy. I showed the picture to Marcus, and we both smiled at the pure joy radiating from the painted figure. This is why I do what I do, I told him. This is what matters. Later that evening, as we cooked dinner together in our kitchen with its mismatched dishes and herb garden windowsill, I felt the deep satisfaction of a life lived on my own terms. No family drama, no financial manipulation, no pressure to be anyone other than exactly who I was. The woman who'd sat at that dinner table 2 years ago, absorbing insults and contemplating surrender, felt like a stranger now. Not because I'd changed completely, but because I'd finally become fully myself. And if my family couldn't love that person, well, that was their loss, not mine. The doorbell rang just as we were sitting down to eat. Marcus went to answer it, and I heard him talking to someone in low, surprised tones. When he came back, he was carrying a small package wrapped in brown paper. Who was it? I asked. Delivery driver. This is for you. I examined the package, which had no return address, just my name written in careful block letters. Inside was a small wooden box, clearly handmade, with a note tucked under the lid. Emma, the note read, I heard about your art center from a friend whose daughter goes there. She says you've given her back her smile. I thought you should have this. Love, Aunt Catherine. I stared at the note, confused. Aunt Catherine had been dead for 3 years. Marcus leaned over to read it. That's impossible. I opened the wooden box and found another note, this one in different handwriting. Dear Emma, my name is Patricia Webb. I was your great-aunt Catherine's attorney. She left specific instructions for me to send you this box if you ever started the art therapy center she knew you'd always dreamed of. She was very proud of you, even if your family never told you so. Inside the box is something she wanted you to have when you were ready to receive it. Nestled in tissue paper was a small silver locket, tarnished with age. When I opened it, I found a tiny photograph of myself as a child, maybe 7 years old, painting at Aunt Catherine's kitchen table. I was completely absorbed in my work, tongue poking out in concentration, covered in paint and absolutely happy. On the other side of the locket was an engraving, for Emma, who sees the world in colors the rest of us forgot existed. Love always, Aunt K. I sat there holding this gift from beyond the grave, this reminder that someone had seen me and loved me exactly as I was, long before I learned to see myself clearly. She knew, I whispered. She always knew. Marcus wrapped his arms around me as I cried, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of being truly, completely understood. Even by someone who was no longer here to tell me so. That night, I put on the locket and haven't taken it off since. Sometimes, when I'm working with a particularly difficult case or doubting my ability to help someone heal, I touch it and remember that little girl at the kitchen table, creating something beautiful just because she could. That little girl grew up to build exactly the life she dreamed of, surrounded by art and children and a man who loves her unconditionally. She learned that family isn't about blood or obligation, it's about choosing to show up for each other, day after day, with kindness and honesty and respect. She learned that sometimes walking away isn't giving up, it's growing up. And she learned that the best revenge isn't hurting the people who hurt you. It's living so well without them that their absence becomes a gift instead of a wound. 3 years later, I'm still learning these lessons, still building this life, still choosing love over fear every single day. It's not always easy, but it's always worth it. The Art Therapy Center has grown beyond anything I'd imagined when I first sketched those plans on our honeymoon. We now have 3 full-time therapists, a partnership with a local children's hospital, and a waiting list that breaks my heart because it means there are so many kids who need help. But it also fills me with purpose because I know we're making a real difference. Last month, a woman named Jennifer brought her 8-year-old son David to us. He'd been through a traumatic custody battle and had stopped speaking almost entirely. His drawings were all black scribbles, violent slashes across paper that seemed to echo the chaos in his young mind. "I don't know what else to do," Jennifer told me during our intake meeting, her voice cracking with exhaustion. "He won't talk to me, won't talk to his therapist. He just disappears inside himself." I recognized something in David's artwork, not just trauma, but a specific kind of betrayal that comes when the adults you trust most fail to protect you. It reminded me of my own feelings after that dinner, though his pain ran much deeper than mine ever had. Working with David became a turning point for me professionally. Traditional art therapy techniques weren't reaching him, so I developed new approaches, drawing on my own experience of having my reality denied and my feelings dismissed. I created exercises focused on reclaiming personal narrative, on distinguishing between what others say about you and what you know to be true about yourself. Slowly, over months of patient work, David's drawings began to change. The black scribbles gave way to recognizable shapes, then to scenes from his life. And finally, one Tuesday afternoon, he handed me a picture of himself smiling. "That's me being brave," he said, the first words he'd spoken in our sessions. His breakthrough led to a research paper I co-authored with his child psychologist, exploring art therapy's role in helping children process family-related trauma. The paper was published in a major journal and caught the attention of other therapists around the country. Before I knew it, I was being invited to speak at conferences, to consult on difficult cases, to train other therapists in the techniques we developed. The scared girl who'd been told she was worthless had somehow become someone others looked to for expertise and guidance. The irony wasn't lost on me. My family had dismissed my work as finger painting for broken kids, but that work was now being recognized nationally as innovative and important. I'd built something meaningful from the ashes of their rejection. Marcus often jokes that I've become the poster child for turning trauma into triumph, but the truth is more complicated than that. Some days are still hard. Some days I catch myself wondering what holiday gatherings would be like if we'd found a way to work things out. Some days I see families laughing together in restaurants and feel a pang of longing for something I never really had but always hoped was possible. The hardest day came last spring, when I learned that Dad had suffered a heart attack. A mutual family friend called to tell me, her voice careful and neutral. "I thought you should know," she said. "I know you and your family have had some difficulties, but I felt wrong not telling you." I sat in my office after that call, staring at a painting one of my teenage students had made, a bridge stretching across a stormy river toward a bright horizon. For hours, I wrestled with the decision of whether to go to the hospital. Marcus found me there after his shift ended, still sitting in the same chair, still staring at the same painting. "You heard," he said simply. "Rebecca called. He's stable, but..." I trailed off, not sure how to finish that sentence. "Do you want to go see him?" That was the question, wasn't it? Did I want to see the man who'd thrown me out of his house, who'd used my signature without permission, who tried to trade me away like a business asset? Did I want to open myself up to potential hurt or manipulation when he was vulnerable, and I might feel obligated to forgive things I wasn't ready to forgive? I don't know, I admit it. Part of me feels like I should. Like maybe this is a chance to... To what? To say goodbye properly, I guess. Or to try one more time to have the conversation we should have had 3 years ago. Marcus pulled up a chair next to mine, close enough that our knees touched. "What does your gut tell you?" he asked. I closed my eyes and tried to listen to the voice beneath all the noise of obligation and guilt and old programming. What did I actually want to do? I think, I said slowly, I want to send flowers and a card. I want him to know I hope he recovers. But I don't want to see him. That sounds like wisdom to me. So that's what I did. I sent a beautiful arrangement with a simple note, wishing you a complete recovery. Take care of yourself. Emma. I didn't include my phone number or address. I didn't offer to visit or ask for updates. I acknowledged our shared history without reopening the door to future contact. Dad survived the heart attack and made a full recovery, according to Rebecca. He never responded to my flowers, which told me everything I needed to know about whether he'd gained any perspective during his brush with mortality. But sending those flowers did something important for me. It proved I could extend compassion without compromising my boundaries, that I could wish someone well without welcoming them back into my life. The experience also crystallized something I'd been thinking about for months. I wanted to expand the Art Therapy Center to include family counseling services. Not just for children, but for adults trying to heal from family dysfunction, to break generational cycles of manipulation and conditional love. I'd learned so much about healthy relationships by building one with Marcus, by creating chosen family with friends and colleagues, by working with kids who were relearning how to trust. That knowledge felt too valuable to keep to myself. The family therapy program launched 6 months later, and our first client was a woman named Sarah, not Marcus's ex, but a different Sarah who reminded me powerfully of my younger self. She was 32, recently divorced, and struggling to maintain relationships with parents who constantly criticized her choices. They say they love me, she told me during our first session, but it never feels like love. It feels like I'm a project they're trying to fix. I knew exactly what she meant. Working with Sarah and others like her helped me understand my own journey in a new way. I thought my story was about revenge, about standing up to bullies who happened to be related to me. But it was actually about something much more fundamental, learning the difference between love and control, between family and belonging, between who others need you to be and who you actually are. The most rewarding part of the family therapy work is watching people discover their own worth. There's a moment that happens in almost every case, a moment when someone stops arguing for their limitations and starts advocating for their possibilities. When they stop asking what's wrong with me that they can't love me, and start asking what's wrong with them that they can't see my value. It's the same moment I had sitting in Marcus's kitchen at 5 in the morning, realizing I had choices I'd never known I possessed. These days, our house is often full of people, friends, colleagues, students who become like family. Last weekend, we hosted a barbecue for the Art Therapy Center staff and their families. Our backyard was full of laughter and conversation, children running between the adults, everyone comfortable and welcome. As I watched Marcus flip burgers while deep in conversation with one of our newest therapists, as I saw David, now 10 and thriving, teaching a younger child how to draw horses, as I felt the easy warmth of genuine community, I thought about that dinner 3 years ago. My biological family had been so focused on appearances, on status, on who deserved what based on arbitrary measures of success. But the family I'd chosen was built on completely different values: kindness, authenticity, mutual support, unconditional acceptance. The contrast was stark enough to take my breath away. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home and Marcus and I were cleaning up the kitchen together, he asked me something that surprised me. "Do you ever think about having kids?" he said, loading plates into the dishwasher. "I know we've talked about it in abstract terms, but what? But seeing you with all those children today, biological and chosen. You're such a natural with them. And I keep thinking about what kind of mother you'd be." I set down the dish towel I'd been holding and really looked at him. This man who'd walked away from my family's approval without hesitation, who'd supported every dream I'd ever shared with him, who'd helped me build a life neither of us could have imagined when we first met. "What kind of mother do you think I'd be?" I asked. "The kind who sees her children for who they are instead of who she wants them to be," he said without hesitation. "The kind who loves without conditions. The kind who breaks cycles instead of repeating them." 6 months later, we started trying for a baby. And now, as I write this with my hand resting on my barely showing belly, I think about the child growing inside me and the world will introduce them to. This child will never wonder if they're loved enough or successful enough or good enough to deserve their parents' affection. They'll never be used as a bargaining chip or treated as an extension of our egos. They'll be celebrated for their unique gifts, supported through their struggles, and loved simply for existing. But most importantly, they'll learn by example that love isn't something you have to earn, it's something you deserve simply by being human. Because at the end of the day, when Marcus and I sit on our front porch swing and watch the sunset paint our little corner of the world in impossible colors, I know exactly who I am and exactly where I belong. And that knowledge, hard-won and dearly bought, is something I can pass on to the next generation. And that knowledge is worth more than any family's approval ever could be.
Story 4.
My parents gave my college fund, my car, and my fiancé to my golden child sister. I didn't scream. I didn't threaten. I just disappeared and built my life from scratch. 10 years later, when they called begging for help with medical bills, I calmly listened and said, "I'll send you exactly what you need." Then I texted them her number. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing quarterly reports in my corner office. Mom's voice cracked through the speaker, trembling in a way I hadn't heard since Dad's first heart attack 3 years ago. "Sarah, honey, we need to talk. It's about Dad's treatment. The insurance won't cover the experimental therapy, and we're looking at $60,000 out of pocket." I set down my coffee cup, the expensive ceramic one with my company logo that I'd earned after 5 years of 18-hour days, and watched the steam curl upward like smoke signals from a life I'd deliberately left behind. How much do you need, Mom? We were hoping. Maybe 30,000 to start? I know it's a lot, but you've done so well for yourself, and Madison's struggling with the twins, and her husband lost his job last month. Madison. Of course. Even now, even when they needed something from me, she was still the first consideration. Still the golden child whose struggles mattered more than anyone else's stability. I'll send you exactly what you need, I said, my voice steady as morning coffee. Give me until tomorrow. After I hung up, I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I'd kept for exactly this moment. The number I'd saved under emergency contact 10 years ago, right before I changed my own number and moved 3 states away without leaving a forwarding address. I typed out a simple message: Mom and Dad need help with medical bills. They're your parents too. Handle it. Then I hit send. The silence in my office felt like justice. 10 years ago, I was 22 and stupidly believed that family meant something more than shared DNA and convenient proximity. I believed that the college fund my grandmother had set up for me, the one she'd started when I was 8 and fed steadily until her death my senior year of high school, actually belonged to me. I believed that the car I'd been driving since my 16th birthday, the one I'd maintained and insured with money from my part-time jobs, was mine to keep after graduation. Most stupidly of all, I believed that my fiancé, David, loved me enough to see through Madison's act. The house on Maple Street still looked the same the day I came home from my college graduation ceremony. Same white shutters that Dad never quite got around to repainting. Same crack in the front walkway where tree roots had pushed through. Same feeling of walking into a place that had never quite felt like home, not since Madison arrived when I was 7 and suddenly became the center of everyone's universe. Mom was in the kitchen, arranging flowers in a vase with the kind of careful attention she usually reserved for Madison's school projects. Oh good, you're back. We need to talk. That phrase. I should have known. In our family, we need to talk never meant good news for me. It meant the family had made a decision about my life without consulting me, and now they were going to explain why it was actually for my own good. Madison's pregnant, Mom said, not looking up from the flowers. She and David are getting married in the fall. The words hit like physical blows. David? My David, with his crooked smile and terrible jokes and the way he'd hold my hand during movies even when his palm got sweaty. David, who'd proposed to me 6 months ago with his grandmother's ring and tears in his eyes. What are you talking about? My voice sounded far away, like it was coming from someone else's throat. Sweetie, sit down. Mom finally looked at me, and her expression was the same one she'd worn when she told me we couldn't afford to get me a bike for Christmas because Madison really wanted that expensive dollhouse. Apologetic but resolute. These things happen. David came to us last week. He feels terrible about everything, but you have to understand, Madison's condition changes things. Her condition? I sank onto the kitchen stool, the same one where I'd done homework every night while Madison watched cartoons in the living room. The pregnancy. And you know how fragile she's always been. The doctor says stress could be dangerous for the baby. Mom's voice took on that protective tone she always used when talking about Madison's various mysterious ailments, the headaches that meant she couldn't do chores, the stomach problems that meant she needed special meals, the anxiety that meant everyone had to walk on eggshells around her. So David's marrying her instead of me because she's pregnant? It's more complicated than that, honey. You're strong. You always have been. You'll bounce back from this. But Madison? She needs stability. She needs someone to take care of her. The kitchen felt like it was tilting. I gripped the edge of the counter and tried to make sense of what was happening. When did this start? David and Madison? Mom's silence was answer enough. How long, Mom? Sarah, honey, it doesn't matter now. What matters is doing the right thing. David's a good man. He's taking responsibility. The right thing. As if there was some cosmic scoreboard where sacrificing my happiness earned points for the family. As if my feelings were optional expenses that could be cut from the budget when times got tough. What about college? I asked, though I was already starting to understand the scope of what was happening. I start at Northwestern in the fall. About that? Dad's voice came from the doorway. He looked older than I remembered, his shoulders rounded in a way that suggested he'd already fought this battle and lost. We need to redirect the fund. Redirect it? Madison's going to need help. Medical expenses, the wedding, getting them started in their own place. Young families need support. He sat down across from me, his hands folded on the table like he was conducting a business meeting. Your grandmother would have understood. She'd always said that money was for education, and Madison's going to need to learn how to be a mother. The logical part of my brain tried to process this. My college fund, the money that was supposed to pay for my degree, my future, my way out of this suffocating house, was being given to my sister so she could play house with my former fiancé. I've already been accepted. I've registered for classes. I have a dorm assignment. Community college is a perfectly good option, Mom said quickly. You can live here for a couple years, save money, and then transfer somewhere local. Madison's going to need help with the baby anyway. It'll be nice having you around. Nice for who? I wanted to ask. Nice for Madison, who would have a built-in babysitter. Nice for my parents, who could continue pretending that everything was normal and fair. Nice for David, who wouldn't have to feel guilty about seeing me around town. And my car? The silence stretched long enough that I knew the answer before Dad spoke. David's truck broke down last week. With a baby coming, they need reliable transportation. You understand? I understood perfectly. I understood that Madison had once again gotten everything she wanted, and everyone expected me to smile and be grateful for the scraps. I understood that my parents had traded my future for the illusion of family harmony. I understood that the person I'd planned to marry had decided I was expendable. What they didn't understand was that I was done. I didn't scream. I didn't slam doors or throw things or demand to know how they could do this to me. I'd learned long ago that emotional reactions only made things worse in our house. Instead, I nodded calmly and said I needed some time to process everything. That night, I lay in my childhood bed, the same twin mattress I'd had since I was 12 because replacing it had never been a priority, and made a plan. Not a revenge plan, not yet. Just a survival plan. I had $3,000 in my savings account from working retail and tutoring kids in math. I had decent grades and a high school diploma. I had exactly one person in the world who'd ever treated me like I mattered, my English teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, who'd written me recommendation letters and told me I was smart enough to go anywhere I wanted. The next morning, I called Northwestern and explained my situation in the most neutral terms possible. Family financial emergency. Need to defer enrollment. Could I reapply next year? The admissions counselor was sympathetic but clear. Deferring would mean losing my scholarship. I'd have to reapply from scratch, compete again for both admission and aid. I understand, I said, sitting in my car in the parking lot of the grocery store where I'd worked summers since I was 16. Thank you for your time. Then I called Mrs. Rodriguez. Sarah, how was graduation? Are you excited about Northwestern? Actually, that's why I'm calling. I need advice about something. I told her everything. Not the emotional parts. I've learned to compartmentalize those, but the practical situation. Parents redirecting college fund. Need alternatives. Looking for options. Mrs. Rodriguez listened without interrupting, which was one of the things I'd always loved about her. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Have you considered the Peace Corps? She asked finally. Or AmeriCorps? There are programs that provide education benefits after service. It would mean delaying college a few years, but you graduate debt-free and with real-world experience. Tell me more, she did. We talked for an hour about options I'd never considered. Service programs that would take me far from Maple Street and everything it represented. Ways to earn money for college that didn't depend on anyone else's generosity or family obligation. By the time I hung up, I had a plan. Madison's wedding was scheduled for October. I submitted my AmeriCorps application in July and was accepted into a program in Oregon by August. My start date was September 15th. I told my parents I'd gotten a job opportunity. Not technically a lie, AmeriCorps was a job, just one that paid in experience and future education benefits rather than immediate salary. I said I'd be moving in a few weeks and gave them my supervisor's contact information for emergencies. Oregon? Mom looked stricken. But what about Madison's wedding? What about helping with the baby? I'm sure you'll figure it out. Sarah, honey, this seems so sudden. Are you sure you're making the right decision? Running away won't solve anything. Running away. As if I was a child having a tantrum rather than an adult making a strategic career move. As if staying here, watching my former fiancé build a life with my sister while I served as their unpaid help, was the mature choice. I'm not running away. I'm moving forward. Dad tried a different approach. What about your car? If you're leaving anyway, David and Madison really do need the transportation. I'd been expecting this. I'll need the car to drive to Oregon. I'll sell it once I get there and buy something more practical. This was also true, though not in the way they understood it. I planned to sell the car, the one I'd been driving and maintaining for 6 years, and use the money for a security deposit on housing and other startup costs. But Sarah, Dad, you gave away my college fund and my fiancé. You're not getting my car too. The words came out calmly, matter-of-factly, like I was reading items from a grocery list. Mom gasped like I'd slapped her. That's not fair, she said. We didn't give David away. He made his own choice. And the money? We're doing what's best for the family. You're doing what's best for Madison. Like always. Sarah Marie, that's enough. Dad's voice carried the authority he'd never needed to use on Madison. Your sister is going through a difficult time. She needs our support. And I don't? The question hung in the air like smoke. I watched my parents exchange the look they'd perfected over the years, the one that said I was being unreasonable, demanding, difficult. The look that said I should know better than to compete with Madison for their attention. You're strong, Mom said finally. You always have been. You don't need us the way she does. There it was. The fundamental equation that had governed my entire childhood. Madison's needs versus my independence. Her fragility versus my strength. Her happiness versus my resilience. They'd never understood that strength wasn't the same as not needing love. That independence wasn't the same as not wanting support. That resilience was something I developed out of necessity, not nature. But I understood now that they never would understand. And I was done trying to teach them. I left on a Thursday morning in early September. Madison was at a doctor's appointment, one of the many that seemed to require David's presence and my mother's anxious phone calls, so the goodbye was just my parents standing awkwardly in the driveway. My entire life fit in the backseat and trunk of the Honda Civic that would soon belong to someone else. Clothes, books, laptop, and the few sentimental items I couldn't bear to leave behind. Everything else I'd given away or thrown out in the weeks prior, each decision a small act of liberation. Call when you get there, Mom said, hugging me with the careful distance she'd maintained since our last conversation. And think about coming back for Christmas. Madison's due in February, and she'll want you here for the birth. She'll want. Not I'll want you here, or we hope you'll visit. Even in goodbye, Madison's desires took precedence over any expression of missing me. I'll be in touch, I said, which was true. I would be in touch. Just not in the way they expected. Dad shook my hand like I was a business associate. Take care of yourself, kiddo. And remember, family's important. Don't stay angry forever. Don't stay angry. As if anger was the problem, rather than the complete disregard for my feelings that had caused it. As if forgiveness was something I owed them, regardless of whether they'd done anything to earn it. I drove away without looking back. Not because I was trying to be dramatic, but because there was genuinely nothing behind me worth seeing. The Pacific Northwest stretched ahead like a promise of possibility. Rain and mountains and people who didn't know anything about Madison or the golden child dynamics or the way I'd learned to make myself small to avoid conflict. People who would judge me based on my work, my character, my contributions, not my willingness to sacrifice my own dreams for family harmony. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. AmeriCorps was everything I'd hoped and harder than I'd expected. The work was challenging: community development in rural areas, teaching adult literacy, coordinating volunteer programs, and the pay was barely enough to survive on. I lived in shared housing with other Corps members, ate more ramen noodles than anyone should, and discovered that freedom has a learning curve. But I was good at the work. Really good. Within 6 months, I was leading teams and developing new program initiatives. Within a year, I was training new members and consulting with other sites. The skills I developed from managing family crises, organization, mediation, crisis management, keeping everyone happy while getting things done, translated surprisingly well to nonprofit work. My supervisor, Janet, was the first person in my adult life to give me feedback that wasn't filtered through family dynamics. You're a natural leader, she told me during my 6-month review. Have you thought about what you want to do after your service term? I had. Every day. College was still the goal, but I was starting to understand that there were many paths to education and career success. Paths that didn't require family funding or approval. I'm thinking about nonprofit management, I said. Maybe social work or public administration. There are some excellent graduate programs that value AmeriCorps experience. Portland State has a program specifically designed for people with service backgrounds. Full funding for qualified candidates. Graduate school. I'd never considered starting with a master's degree, but why not? Why follow the traditional path when the traditional path had been closed to me? I applied that spring and was accepted with a full assistantship. 2 years of graduate school, fully funded, with a stipend for living expenses. I would graduate with a master's degree in public administration and no debt. Madison had her baby in February, a daughter named Emma, according to the birth announcement that arrived at my old address and was forwarded to me 3 months later. David sent a photo along with a brief note, "Thought you'd want to see your niece. Hope you're doing well. Things are good here." I studied the photo for a long time. Emma was beautiful, with David's dark eyes and what looked like it might become Madison's blonde hair. She was tiny and perfect and completely innocent of the circumstances that had brought her into existence. I felt no anger toward the baby. How could I? She hadn't chosen her parents or the way she'd come into the world. But I felt no automatic surge of aunt-like love either. She was a stranger's child, beautiful but unconnected to my life. I tucked the photo into my desk drawer and went back to my thesis research. Graduate school transformed me in ways I hadn't expected. Not just intellectually, though learning about organizational behavior and public policy gave me frameworks for understanding power dynamics that extended far beyond my family, but personally. I discovered that I was funny when I wasn't walking on eggshells. That I was decisive when I didn't have to consider everyone else's feelings first. That I was confident when my ideas were judged on their merit rather than their potential to upset family harmony. I made friends. Real friends, who chose to spend time with me because they enjoyed my company, not because we were related or thrown together by circumstances. Friends who listened to my stories about growing up in Madison's shadow and responded with outrage on my behalf rather than suggestions for how I should be more understanding. "That's messed up," said Ashley, my roommate and closest friend, after I told her about the college fund. Like, genuinely messed up. You know that, right? It was such a simple validation, but it meant everything. For years, I'd been told that my feelings about the family dynamics were wrong, selfish, or misguided. Having someone else confirm that the treatment had been unfair felt like being given permission to trust my own perceptions. I dated a little, though nothing serious. It was hard to trust romantic feelings after David, and I was focused on building my career. But it was nice to discover that men could be interested in me without it being some kind of consolation prize or settling for second best. My parents called occasionally. Awkward conversations where Mom updated me on Madison's life, Emma's first steps, David's new job, their plans to buy a house, and I shared carefully edited versions of my own progress. They seemed proud but puzzled by my success, as if they couldn't quite reconcile their image of me as the responsible but unremarkable daughter with the reality of my thriving independent life. "You sound different," Mom said during one call in my final semester. "Happier." "I am happier." "That's good, honey. I worry about you out there all alone." Alone. She said it like it was a disease rather than a choice. Like I was suffering in isolation rather than thriving in independence. "I'm not alone, Mom. I have friends, colleagues, a community. I have a life." "Of course you do. I just meant, it's not the same as family." She was right about that. It wasn't the same as family. It was better. I graduated magna cum laude and was immediately hired by a nonprofit organization in Seattle focused on economic development. The salary was modest but livable, and the work was everything I hoped for: complex, meaningful, challenging. I was good at it, and more importantly, I loved it. Within 3 years, I was promoted to program director. Within 5, I was assistant director of the entire organization. By year 7, I'd been recruited by a larger nonprofit in Denver with a national scope and a salary that finally allowed me to stop checking my bank balance before making purchases. I bought a condo. Not huge, but mine. I furnished it slowly, choosing each piece carefully rather than accepting hand-me-downs or making do with whatever was cheap. I discovered I had strong opinions about thread count and art and the proper way to organize a spice rack. I traveled. Not exotic destinations, nonprofit salaries have limits, but weekend trips to national parks, long weekends in interesting cities, a 2-week vacation to Europe that I planned and paid for myself. I learned that I loved hiking, hated museums, and could navigate foreign public transportation systems with surprising confidence. I started investing. Small amounts at first, but consistent. I opened a retirement account, bought life insurance, established an emergency fund. All the responsible adult things that no one had taught me but that I figured out through research and careful planning. The best part was the silence. Not literal silence, my life was full of conversations and meetings and phone calls. But the absence of family drama, constant crisis management, and the exhausting work of managing everyone else's emotions. I could come home to my own space and think my own thoughts without wondering how they might affect Madison or whether they would upset my parents. I was 32 and genuinely happy. Not the frantic, fragile happiness that depended on everything going perfectly, but the steady, sustainable happiness that comes from building a life that fits you. That's when Dad had his first heart attack. The call came from a number I didn't recognize. Madison's voice, higher and more frantic than I remembered, babbling about hospitals and emergency rooms and how I needed to come home right away. Madison? Slow down. What happened? Dad collapsed at work. They think it was a heart attack. Mom's completely falling apart, and I don't know what to do, and the doctors are asking about medical history and insurance, and Sarah, I need you to come home. I can't handle this alone. I can't handle this alone. The phrase that had governed so much of my childhood. Madison couldn't handle responsibility, conflict, difficult decisions, or apparently any crisis that required adult functioning. Is he stable? I think so. They said he's conscious now, but they're running tests. Sarah, please. I know things have been weird between us, but this is Dad. Things have been weird between us. As if the complete restructuring of my life around her convenience was just a minor awkwardness that we'd never quite gotten around to addressing. I'll call the hospital and talk to his doctors, I said. What's the name and room number? I spent an hour on the phone with medical staff, getting real information rather than Madison's emotional interpretation. Dad had indeed had a heart attack, but a relatively mild one. He was stable, responding well to treatment, and expected to make a full recovery with proper medication and lifestyle changes. I called Madison back. The cardiologist says he's going to be fine. He'll need to stay in the hospital for a few more days for monitoring, but then he can go home with medication and follow-up care. But Sarah, Mom's a mess, and I have Emma and work, and David's been pulling double shifts since his promotion. I can't take time off right now. We need you here. We need you here. Not I miss you, or I'd love to see you, or I'm worried about you too. We need you here to handle the things that are inconvenient for everyone else. Madison, you're 30 years old. Mom's 61. Between the two of you, you can manage Dad's recovery without me flying across the country. But you're so much better at this stuff. You always were. And you don't have kids to worry about. There it was. The assumption that my life was somehow less important because it didn't include the responsibilities that she'd chosen. That my job, my relationships, my commitments were automatically secondary to her needs. I'm glad Dad's okay, I said. Give him my love, and tell him I'll call tomorrow to check in. Sarah, wait. I hung up. Dad recovered fully, as the doctors had predicted. Mom sent email updates, awkward, formal messages that read like medical reports rather than personal communication. Madison didn't call again. Life continued. Work projects, weekend hikes, dinners with friends, the quiet satisfaction of a life lived on my own terms. But something had shifted. The call had reminded me that my family still existed, still expected me to drop everything when they needed something, still assumed that my independence was temporary and conditional. For the first time in years, I found myself thinking about revenge. Not dramatic revenge. Not destroying their lives or causing them pain. But something more elegant, allowing them to experience the natural consequences of their choices without my intervention. For my entire childhood and young adulthood, I'd been the family's problem solver. The one who handled crises, managed details, smoothed over conflicts. When Madison had problems, I was expected to help. When my parents were overwhelmed, I was expected to step in. But what would happen if I simply didn't? The opportunity came sooner than I'd expected. 3 years after Dad's heart attack, the second one was worse. Much worse. Madison's call came at midnight on a Saturday, her voice raw with panic. Sarah, Dad's in surgery. They don't know if he's going to make it. The doctors are talking about experimental treatments, but insurance won't cover them. We need $60,000 just to start, and that might not even be enough. I'm sorry to hear that, Madison. That must be terrifying. Can you come home? Mom's completely lost it, and I'm trying to handle everything, but it's too much. The paperwork alone is overwhelming, and someone needs to research treatment options and deal with the insurance company. Someone. Always someone else. Never Madison herself, taking responsibility for managing her own family's crisis. I can't take time off work right now, I said, which was true. We were in the middle of a major grant application that required my direct involvement. But Sarah, This is Dad we're talking about. Your dad. My dad. The man who'd given away my college fund without a second thought. Who'd handed my car keys to my sister's boyfriend. Who'd told me I was strong enough to handle disappointment but Madison was too fragile to handle responsibility. I understand this is difficult, Madison. But you're going to have to handle it. I can't handle $60,000. We don't have that kind of money. David's still paying off student loans, and we just bought the house, and Emma needs braces. What about the college fund? Silence. The money that was supposed to be for my education. The money that went to you instead. What happened to that? Sarah, that was years ago. We used it for the wedding and the down payment and now it's gone, and you need someone else to solve your financial problems. This isn't about money, Sarah. This is about family. About Dad's life. Family. The word they always used when they needed something from me. Never when I'd needed something from them. You're right, I said. It is about family. So handle it as a family. I hung up before she could respond. They called back, of course. Multiple times. Mom, crying and incoherent, begging me to help. Madison, angry and desperate, demanding to know how I could be so cold. Even David, after all these years, leaving awkward voicemails about family obligations and doing the right thing. I listened to each message and deleted it without responding. The breakthrough came when Mom called from Dad's hospital room, her voice steadier than it had been in weeks. Sarah, honey, I need to ask you something, and I need you to really think about your answer. Okay. If something happens to your father because we couldn't afford the treatment, will you be able to live with that? Will you be able to live with yourself knowing you could have helped but chose not to? It was a good question. A fair question. And I'd been asking myself the same thing for days. Mom, can I ask you something in return? Of course. 10 years ago, when you gave away my college fund and my car and my fiancé to Madison, did you think about whether I could live with that? Did you consider what it would do to me to watch my entire future get redistributed to someone who'd never had to work for anything? Sarah, that's not the same thing. Why not? Because education isn't life or death? Because my dreams weren't as important as Madison's convenience? Because you were strong enough to handle it. You proved that. Look at your life now, you're successful, independent, happy. You didn't need our help. There it was again. The fundamental misunderstanding that had shaped our entire relationship. The idea that strength meant not needing support. That independence meant not deserving consideration. That my ability to survive hardship meant it was acceptable to create more hardship for me. You're right, Mom. I didn't need your help. I built my life without you. And now you're discovering what it feels like to face a crisis without someone else to solve it for you. So you're going to let your father die out of spite? I'm going to let you handle your own family emergency the way I handled mine. Alone. But even as I said it, I knew I wasn't going to let Dad die. Not because I owe them anything, but because I wasn't the kind of person who could live with that choice. They'd raised me to be responsible, to fix problems, to put family first. I couldn't undo 32 years of conditioning in a moment of anger. But I could make sure they understood the price of their expectations. I'll send you exactly what you need, I said. Give me until tomorrow. Oh, Sarah, thank God. I knew you wouldn't abandon us. I knew, Mom. I need Madison's phone number. What? You have Madison's number? No, I need her current number. The one she uses now. But why? Just text it to me. I spent that evening researching Dad's condition and treatment options. Not because I planned to pay for them, but because I wanted to understand exactly what my family was facing. The treatment was experimental but promising. The $60,000 was a legitimate estimate. Without it, Dad's long-term prognosis was significantly worse. I could afford it. Not easily, but without destroying my financial stability. The investment accounts I'd been building for 10 years, the emergency fund, the careful budgeting and planning, it all added up to enough. I could write a check and solve their problem immediately. Instead, I pulled out my phone and sent a text to the number Mom had provided. Mom and Dad need help with medical bills. Dad's treatment will cost $60,000 that insurance won't cover. They're your parents too. Handle it. Then I sent a second message, P.S. This is Sarah. I'm doing well, thanks for asking. Hope Emma's braces work out. Madison called within 5 minutes. I didn't answer. She called 6 more times that night. I turned off my phone. The next morning, I called Mom from my office. Did you get what you needed? I asked. Sarah, what did you do? Madison called in hysterics last night. She said you texted her about paying for Dad's treatment, but she doesn't have that kind of money. You know she doesn't. The same way you knew I didn't have college money when you gave mine away? That's completely different. How? Because Madison has a family to support. She has responsibilities. And I didn't have a future to support? I didn't have responsibilities to my own life? Sarah, please. I don't understand what you're trying to prove here. If you can help, why are you making this so complicated? I'm not making it complicated, Mom. I'm making it fair. Fair? Madison got my education fund when she needed money for her family. Now she can provide Dad's medical fund when he needs money for his health. That's fair. But she doesn't have $60,000. Then she'll have to figure out how to get it. The same way I had to figure out how to pay for college. The same way I had to figure out how to build a career without family support. The same way I had to figure out how to build a life from scratch when you redistributed mine to someone else. The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if she'd hung up. You've gotten hard, Sarah. This isn't the daughter I raised. You're right. The daughter you raised would have already written the check and apologized for not doing it sooner. But that daughter was a doormat who let her family walk all over her. I'm not her anymore. So what happens now? What happens to your father? That depends on Madison. She's had 10 years to build wealth with the head start you gave her. She's got a house, a car that used to be mine, a husband, and a settled life. Surely she can figure out how to help her father. And if she can't? I took a deep breath. This was the moment I've been building toward for 10 years without fully realizing it. Then I guess you'll discover what it feels like to face an impossible situation without someone else to fix it for you. Just like I did. Madison didn't call me back, but she did call Mom. Repeatedly. I know because Mom called me with updates on their conversations, each one more desperate than the last. Madison had no savings. The house purchase had drained their finances, and David's student loans were larger than I'd realized. They'd been living paycheck to paycheck despite both of them working full-time. Emma's orthodontics, school expenses, and the general cost of raising a child had left them with no emergency fund. In other words, they'd done exactly what I'd expected them to do with my college fund, spend it on immediate desires rather than building long-term security. She's trying to get a loan, Mom reported during one of our daily calls. But the banks won't approve $60,000 without collateral, and the house is already mortgaged to the limit. What about David's parents? They retired on a fixed income. They offered $5,000, but that's all they can manage. Friends? Other family members? Sarah, nobody just has this kind of money lying around. You know that. I did know that. Most people didn't have $60,000 available for emergencies. But then again, most people hadn't had their college fund redirected to enable someone else's poor financial planning. What about a GoFundMe? I suggested. People raise money for medical expenses online all the time. Madison started one last week. It's raised about $8,000 so far. $8,000 out of $60,000. Even crowdfunding had limits. She could sell the house, I said. Sarah. They just bought it. Emma's settled in her school, they've built community connections. I had to leave my community too, Mom. Remember? When I moved across the country to build a new life because the one I'd planned got redistributed to Madison. That was different. You were young, single. I was engaged, Mom. To David. Who's now Madison's husband and Emma's father. I think I understand something about having your life plans disrupted. Another long silence. What do you want from us, Sarah? What would it take for you to help? It was the first time anyone in my family had asked what I wanted rather than telling me what I should do. I want you to understand, I said. I want you to experience what it feels like to need help and not get it. I want Madison to understand what it's like to face an impossible situation without someone else swooping in to fix it. I want all of you to understand what strength really costs. And then you'll help? Maybe. Or maybe Madison will figure out another solution. She's resourceful when she needs to be. She managed to steal my fiancé, after all. Sarah, I have to go, Mom. I have a meeting. The resolution came from an unexpected source. David. He showed up at my office on a Thursday afternoon, looking older and more tired than I remembered. My assistant buzzed me to say that someone was asking to see me about a personal matter, and when I walked out to the lobby, there he was. Hello, Sarah. David. We stared at each other for a moment. He looked like he wanted to say something profound, but settled for the practical instead. Can we talk somewhere private? I led him to a small conference room and closed the door. He sat heavily in one of the chairs, running his hands through hair that was thinner than it had been 10 years ago. I know you probably don't want to see me, he said. You're right. I don't. I understand why you're angry. About everything. About what happened between us, about the money, about the way your family treated you. You have every right to be angry. Thank you for the permission. He winced. I deserve that. I deserve worse than that. What do you want, David? I want to make a deal with you. A deal? I'll give you back the car. I stared at him. What? Your Honda. I still have it. Madison drives it every day. I'll sign the title back to you, free and clear, if you help with your dad's medical bills. David, that car is 10 years old. It's not worth $60,000. I know. But it's yours. It was always yours. And maybe it's a start. A start toward what? I wanted to ask. Toward forgiveness? Toward some kind of relationship? Toward pretending that giving me back something that had never been his to take was meaningful? Why now? I asked instead. Because Madison's falling apart. Because your mom is barely holding it together. Because your dad might die, and I'll have to live with knowing I could have done something to prevent it but didn't. What could you do? I could convince you to help. I could apologize properly. I could admit that what we did to you was wrong and try to make it right. We? Madison and I, your parents. All of us. We took advantage of your willingness to put everyone else first. We let you sacrifice your dreams so we could have ours. It was selfish and cruel, and I've regretted it every day for 10 years. But not enough to do anything about it. Not enough to give up the life we built on the foundation of your sacrifice. You're right about that too. At least he was honest. If you've regretted it so much, why didn't you ever reach out? Why didn't you ever try to make amends? Because I was a coward. Because I was afraid you'd tell me exactly what you thought of me, and I wasn't ready to hear it. Because it was easier to tell myself that you were better off without us than to face what we'd done. And now? Now your dad is dying, and my daughter asks me sometimes why she doesn't have an Aunt Sarah like her friends have aunts. And I don't know what to tell her. Emma, the innocent child in all of this, who'd never chosen her parents or the circumstances of her birth. What does Madison think about your plan? She doesn't know I'm here. She thinks I'm at work. What happens when you go home and tell her you gave away her car to convince me to pay for my father's medical treatment? I don't know. We'll figure it out. The same way I had to figure out how to pay for college? Yes. Exactly like that. For the first time in our conversation, David met my eyes directly. I know it's not enough, Sarah. I know giving you back one car doesn't balance out everything we took from you. But it's what I can do right now, today, to try to start making things right. And if I say no? Then I go home and tell my wife that I tried. Tell your parents that I tried. Tell myself that I tried. And hope that's enough to sleep at night. I studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or calculation. But he just looked tired and scared and genuinely remorseful. The car title isn't enough, I said finally. What else? I want a written apology. From you and from Madison. Not a generic sorry things worked out this way apology. A specific acknowledgement of what you did and how it affected me. Done. I want Madison to contribute something meaningful to Dad's treatment. Not the whole $60,000, but something that requires real sacrifice on her part. Something that hurts. How much? $10,000. However she has to get it. David swallowed hard. That's a lot for us right now. It was a lot for me when I lost my entire college fund. It was a lot when I had to start over from nothing. It's still a lot when I have to choose between helping my family and maintaining my own financial security. You're right. I'll talk to her. And I want an acknowledgement that this help comes with no strings attached. I'm not rejoining the family. I'm not coming home for holidays. I'm not going to be Emma's emergency babysitter or your marriage counselor or Madison's emotional support system. This is a one-time financial transaction, not a reconciliation. Understood. And David? I want you to explain to Emma why she doesn't have an Aunt Sarah. I want you to tell her the truth about what happened, in age-appropriate terms. I want her to understand that actions have consequences and that family isn't an excuse for treating people badly. He nodded slowly. I'll find a way to do that. Then we have a deal. The paperwork took a week to arrange. Madison's apology letter arrived by email 2 days after my conversation with David, and I could tell from the tone that she'd written it through gritted teeth. But it was specific, acknowledging that she'd pursued a relationship with my fiancé while we were engaged, that she'd participated in the decision to redirect my college fund, and that she understood how these actions had affected my life and future. David's letter was longer and more detailed. He wrote about the guilt he'd carried, the selfishness of his choices, and his admiration for what I'd built despite the obstacles they'd placed in my path. It felt genuine in a way that Madison's did not. Madison's contribution to Dad's medical fund came from a combination of sources: a loan against her car title, the liquidation of a small retirement account, and money borrowed from David's parents despite their limited income. It was clearly a struggle, clearly a sacrifice, clearly something that would create financial hardship for them. It was exactly what I'd wanted her to experience. On Friday afternoon, David met me at a coffee shop near my office with the Honda's title, properly signed and notarized. The car was parked outside, looking exactly as I remembered it but somehow smaller than it had seemed when I was younger. Madison wanted me to ask if you'd consider visiting Emma sometime, he said as I signed the paperwork. Not regularly, just. She's curious about you. She's seen pictures. What did you tell her about why I haven't been around? I told her that sometimes grown-ups make mistakes that hurt the people they love, and sometimes those people need space to heal. I told her that you're my wife's sister but that you live far away because of choices we made a long time ago. It was better than I'd expected. Honest without being too detailed for a child to process. Maybe someday, I said. But not yet. I understand. We sat in silence for a moment, two people who'd once planned to build a life together, now strangers connected only by shared history and mutual regret. For what it's worth, David said, I think you would have been happy if things had worked out differently between us. But I also think you're happier now than you would have been if you'd married me and stayed in that town. You were always too big for that life. It was probably true. The woman I'd become in the past 10 years was stronger, more independent, more accomplished than the girl who'd planned to marry her high school boyfriend and live near her parents forever. But it was strange to hear him acknowledge it. Take care of yourself, David. And take care of Emma. I will. And Sarah. Thank you. For helping with your dad, but also for letting me try to make this right, even in a small way. I watched him drive away in the Honda that would soon be mine again, and felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness, exactly, but a loosening of the anger I'd carried for so long. A sense of completion. I transferred $50,000 to my parents' account that evening. Not the full $60,000, Madison's $10,000 contribution would cover the rest, but enough to ensure Dad could get the treatment he needed. Mom called within minutes of receiving the bank notification. Sarah, I don't know how to thank you. The doctors can start treatment on Monday, and they're very optimistic about his chances. Good. I'm glad he'll be okay. Madison told me about the car. And the letters. I don't understand why all of that was necessary, but I'm grateful that David found a way to convince you to help. Mom, David didn't convince me to help. I was always going to help. But I needed you to understand what it cost me. What do you mean? I mean that giving you $50,000 is hard for me. It wipes out most of my emergency fund. It means I'll have to delay some of my own plans, scale back my lifestyle, rebuild my financial security. It's a real sacrifice that will affect my life for the next several years. Oh. I didn't realize. The same way you didn't realize that giving away my college fund was a real sacrifice that affected my life for the next several years. The same way you didn't realize that losing my fiancé and my car and my family's support was a real loss that changed everything about my future. Sarah, I am not telling you this to make you feel guilty, Mom. I'm telling you this so you understand that help isn't free. That when someone sacrifices for you, it costs them something real. That strength doesn't mean not being hurt by other people's choices. Another long silence. Will you come visit? When Dad's better. He's been asking about you. Maybe. But not for a while. And not because things are back to normal. Things aren't normal, Mom. They can't be normal after everything that's happened. What does that mean for us? As a family? I don't know yet. But I know it doesn't mean pretending the last 10 years didn't happen. It doesn't mean going back to the way things were before. And it definitely doesn't mean Madison gets to pretend she didn't participate in destroying my life just because I helped save Dad's. She feels terrible about everything. She should feel terrible. What she did was terrible. Can't you find it in your heart to forgive her? Forgiveness. The word that always came up when people wanted to be released from the consequences of their actions without doing the work to earn it. Maybe someday, Mom. But forgiveness isn't something you can demand or schedule. It's something that happens when the person who was hurt is ready, if they're ever ready. And I'm not ready. What would it take for you to be ready? It was a good question. A fair question. And I realized I didn't have a complete answer. Time, I said finally. A lot more time. And evidence that people have actually changed, not just that they're sorry they got caught or sorry they need something from me. Evidence like what? Like Madison learning to handle her own problems instead of expecting other people to fix them. Like you and Dad treating me like a person with my own needs instead of just a resource to be tapped when convenient. Like all of you acknowledging that I built a good life without you, and that it was your loss, not mine, when I left. We do acknowledge that. We're proud of what you've accomplished. Being proud isn't the same as taking responsibility for making it necessary. Sarah, I have to go, Mom. Give Dad my love, and tell him I'm glad the treatment will help. I will. And Sarah, I love you. I love you too, Mom. But love isn't enough anymore. It has to be backed up by actions. After I hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment and thought about the conversation. About the strange mixture of satisfaction and sadness I felt. About the family I'd lost and the life I'd gained and the impossibility of ever fully reconciling the two. The money was gone from my account. Dad would get his treatment. Madison would learn what financial struggle felt like. David would have to explain to his daughter why actions have consequences. My parents would have to live with the knowledge that they'd nearly lost me forever through their own choices. It wasn't perfect justice. It wasn't complete revenge. But it was something. A rebalancing of scales that had been tipped against me for too long. And for the first time in 10 years, when I thought about my family, I didn't feel angry. I felt something more complex but ultimately more peaceful, indifference mixed with pity, distance mixed with mild concern, and the quiet satisfaction that comes from knowing you've acted according to your own values rather than other people's expectations. I never did visit Emma. Not because I held her responsible for her parents' choices, but because I'd learned that you can't build authentic relationships on foundations of guilt and obligation. Maybe someday, when she was older and could understand the complexities of family dynamics, we might find our own way to connect. But it would have to be genuine, not forced. 6 months later, I got a brief email from David saying that Dad's treatment had been successful, that he was back to his normal activities, and that everyone was doing well. He thanked me again and said that Madison had started seeing a therapist to work through some of her own issues. He didn't ask for anything or suggest that we should reconnect. It was just information, shared with no expectations attached. I was glad to hear Dad was okay. I was glad Madison was getting help. I was glad David seemed to understand that gratitude didn't create obligation. But mostly, I was glad that their problems were no longer my problems to solve. I had my own life to live. And I was finally free to live it.